When you think of Darth Maul, maybe you picture the twin-bladed saber, or the crimson tattoos etched like fury across his skin. Maybe it's his silence, the way he moved like a phantom in the dark. But Maul was never just a weapon. He was a scar the galaxy tried to forget. Behind the rage and precision was something older, something deeper, a story of pain, carved before he could speak. A life built not on destiny but on design. He was born in 54 BBY, on the forgotten world of Dathomir, a planet lost in shadow and storm, where the red mist never cleared, and where the Force twisted itself into something wild. Maul wasn't his real name. It wasn't even a name. It was a label, one given after the suffering began. His mother was a Nightsister, one of the witches who ruled Dathomir's dark forests through blood and magic. Her name was Kaichina, but she did not raise her son with tenderness. She gave him away willingly to the shadow that waited beyond the stars, to Darth Sidious. Before that moment, the boy lived among the Night Brothers, raised in ritual and silence. From his earliest breaths, he was marked not just by his people, but by the Force itself. The dark side wrapped around him like chains. Before he could walk, the tattoos were burned into his flesh. Symbols of identity? No. These were seals. Etchings meant to bind his rage, to sculpt his fear. He didn't cry. He didn't ask why. He endured. Maul wasn't taught to speak gently. He was taught to strike without hesitation. His limbs were trained before his thoughts could even form. He didn't learn to dream. He learned to obey. The Force reacted strangely around him. Where other children struggled to lift stones, Maul shattered bones. Beasts avoided his scent. Even the warriors among the Night Brothers kept their distance. There was something unnatural in the way he moved. Not gifted, cursed. He was tested endlessly. Thrown into pits. Starved. Pushed until his body broke, and was then remade stronger. No one praised him. No one offered love. Only survival and silence. And above all of it, watching from the shadows, was the man in black robes. Sidious. He had waited patiently, not for a boy, but for a blade. And on Dathomir, in that broken child, he found one. Maul never understood why the Sith Lord chose him, but even as a child, he sensed what it meant. He would never return home. He would never belong. This was not the story of a child taken. It was the story of a child built. A child the Force did not protect. A child it abandoned for something far colder. Purpose. In the heart of Dathomir, where the roots of trees dripped with dark ichor, the Nightsisters watched their sons from above. They did not nurture. They evaluated. The matriarchs ruled with silence and ritual. Every offering, every child, every whisper of power was weighed beneath their gaze. And when they looked upon the boy, they didn't see a future warrior. They saw danger, a storm they had not summoned, and perhaps could not contain. He had no name, no title, only whispers. The one who burns too bright, the one with the yellow eyes. They watched him as he grew, not out of pride, but fear. His mother, Kaichina, had broken tradition by giving him to the off-worlder. But even before then, the boy had stood apart. When the other Night Brothers trained with dull blades, he was handed a real one. When they practiced restraint, he was told to strike until silence. He did not understand the difference. He only understood the look in their eyes, caution, not kinship. There was a test handed down through the matriarchs, quiet and cruel. The young are placed into a ring. No rules. Only one command: survive. Maul was placed there when he was just 5. The other child was older, larger, more experienced. But Maul didn't hesitate. He didn't wait. He lunged not with fear, but with fury. He shattered bone, left the other boy breathing, but broken. And he didn't stop until hands pulled him away. The matriarchs said nothing. They did not cheer. They simply watched the blood dry on his hands and made their decision. This one would not remain here. He was not a knight brother. He was not even Dathomir anymore. He was something outside the old rules. A vessel meant to be emptied and filled with something older than magic. The Nightsisters began the deeper rites. They drew lines across his skin in ichor. They awakened the deeper layers of the force that slept within his blood. Not to grant him wisdom, but to harden him, to make him less boy and more blade. Every ceremony etched more silence into his soul. He no longer reacted to pain. He no longer flinched when tested. He learned to endure the poison, to walk barefoot across the sharp thorns they grew in secret chambers beneath the trees, to sit in the center of the temple, blindfolded and alone, until he heard the Force speak not in light, but in command. They broke him not out of malice, but because he could not be allowed to break later. Because the one who waited, the Sith Lord who stood beyond the fog, would not tolerate hesitation, would not tolerate weakness. And the boy knew it. Even then, he felt Sidious, not in voice, not in presence, but like a whisper in his blood, a call beneath the surface of every nightmare. His brothers feared the Offworlders. Maul did not. He feared only one thing: failure. By his 6th year, he was no longer spoken to, only spoken about. The witches began calling him the Offering. He wasn't raised. He was prepared. He wasn't trained. He was delivered. And when the time came, when the cloaked shadow finally descended from the stars to collect his prize, none stopped him. The Nightsisters turned their backs. The Night Brothers lowered their eyes. And Maul said nothing, because in his mind, he had already left. Long ago, he stood at the edge of the clearing, silent, cloaked, untouched by the mist. The jungle did not move around him. The trees leaned away. Even the wind knew better than to touch a Sith Lord. He had returned for the child, Darth Sidious, the man who hid behind many names, the one who wore the smile of a politician and the heart of a shadow. He had been watching Maul since the boy could crawl. There had been others, other candidates, foundlings on far-off worlds, but none with the raw edge. None who survived everything they were supposed to fear. Only Maul. He had been studied for years, not tested like a Jedi initiate, but measured like metal being forged in secret. Sidious saw what the witches did not. This boy had no attachments, no softness, no voice in his head whispering about balance or mercy. He was pure in one thing: hatred, and that was enough. Sidious did not speak when he arrived. He did not need to. The Nightsisters had already made their offering. The boy was waiting. He stood barefoot in the mud, head lowered, not because he was afraid, but because he had already accepted the path. There would be no farewell, no words from his mother, only the brief flicker of her gaze across the swamp. She had chosen this. She had chosen to give her son to the darkest thing in the galaxy. Not because she was cruel, but because she believed in power. And Sidious was power incarnate. He looked down at the child, small, still, unflinching. A lesser master would have doubted. Sidious did not. He reached out, not with hands, but with the Force. Not to lift, not to comfort, but to enter. And when he touched the boy's mind, he found no resistance. Only silence. Only obedience. He spoke then, for the first time. "You are mine now." Maul did not answer. He did not need to. He was taken that night. Not in secret, but without ceremony. The sisters turned their backs. The warriors lowered their heads. Dathomir would not mourn him, because Dathomir had never claimed him. They traveled in silence. Sidious spoke little. His words were not for comfort, but for control. "You were born to destroy the Jedi. You will feel pain, and it will make you stronger. Love is a lie, mercy is weakness." Each lesson was a chain, each silence a test. Maul listened, not because he believed, but because there was nothing else left inside him to answer back. In the cold halls of the Outer Rim strongholds, where Sidious trained his secret apprentice, Maul was stripped of anything that could be called identity. No name, no past. Only movement, only orders. He was not a student. He was a tool, sharpened, weighted, perfected. Every moment was designed to remind him. He was not chosen. He was built. Sidious did not teach him patience. He taught him how to wait, how to kneel, how to kill without question. And Maul excelled, not because he sought approval, but because he understood one thing. If he failed, he would be replaced. And no one would remember he ever existed. So he endured. He trained. He bled in silence. And with every broken bone, every bruised muscle, every sleepless night spent memorizing the forms of combat, he came closer to becoming what Sidious desired. A shadow, a whisper, a monster born in silence. The Jedi would never see him coming, and by the time they did, it would already be too late. He was not given a name. He earned it. Through blood, through silence, through pain. In the hidden training halls of the Sith, far from the gaze of Jedi eyes, the boy became something else. Not a child, not a man, but a weapon shaped to strike, vanish, and never question why. Sidious did not praise him. There were no kind words. Only new challenges, new forms, new wounds. Maul trained in every form of lightsaber combat, not to master them, but to break them. Form I, Form Thi, Form V. He learned each until his body moved without thought, until his strikes came faster than instinct. He was taught how to move without sound, how to enter a room without being seen, how to read the posture of a Jedi and predict their hesitation. And when he could perform the forms blindfolded, with broken ribs and blood in his eyes, only then did Sidious speak his name. From now on, you are Maul. Not a name of family, not one of honor. It was a command to Maul, to destroy, to leave nothing standing. Maul accepted it, not because he liked it, but because it finally gave shape to what he already was. There was no resistance left, only purpose. As years passed, Maul grew into a shadow. Tall, silent, disciplined. His face no longer a boy's but a mask. Painted in the tattoos of the Sith, their lines cruel and exact. They burned when he fought. They reminded him who he served. He built his own lightsaber, not as an expression of self, like the Jedi, but as an extension of Sidious's will. It was twin-bladed, balanced, merciless. The hum of it echoed in Maul's chambers like a whisper from the void. Sidious watched his progress closely, but never as a father, never even as a master. Only as a sculptor admires the edge of a blade before it is sent to war. Maul did not ask questions. He had been trained not to. But deep inside, something stirred. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the jungles of Dathomir, the smell of blood in the dirt, the soft wind brushing across the high cliffs, and his mother standing in silence, watching him go. He never spoke of her, but she returned in his dreams. Sometimes she was proud, sometimes she was afraid. Maul pushed those dreams away. There was no room for doubt. Sidious had taught him that the Jedi were weak. They clung to compassion, to structure, to light. Maul believed it. But belief was not the same as peace. He fought droids, then beasts, then assassins sent to test him. He killed them all, not for glory, but because survival was the only language he truly understood. Every success brought him closer to the moment he longed for. His first mission. His first strike against the order that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. The Jedi. He knew little of them. Only what Sidious allowed. They were proud, arrogant, blind. He would be the truth they never saw coming. But Maul did not crave the fight. He did not even crave victory. He craved proof. Proof that everything he had suffered meant something. That he was not just a discarded child, painted in scars. He wanted the Jedi to fall, because only then would his life have purpose. He was no apprentice. He was no Sith Lord. He was the secret, the shadow. He was the scream waiting behind the silence. And the galaxy had no idea how close it stood to being torn apart. He was never told to kneel. He simply did. Because the fear was already inside him. Not fear of death, but of being forgotten. Sidious never smiled. He never praised. He only watched like a sculptor deciding whether the stone was worth carving. And Maul was silent. The training began without ceremony. There were no robes, no titles, only tasks and consequences. He was beaten for hesitation, starved for emotion, left in darkness when he asked questions. The boy learned quickly, because failure did not bring disappointment. It brought punishment, and pain had no delay. Sidious taught through repetition. Force strikes, combat stances, breathing drills in frozen air until Maul's skin cracked. Meditation under dripping stone. Silence that lasted days. Not once did the Sith Lord explain why. He didn't need to. Because fire does not ask why it burns. And Maul was being turned into fire. He was not an apprentice. He was not a student. He was a tool. A weapon meant to destroy, not to think. In the corridors of forgotten worlds, in underground bunkers buried beneath ice or sand, Sidious forged him always in secret, always alone, because the Jedi could not know, because even the Sith could not know. Maul was the whisper beneath the rule of two, the third shadow that should not exist, the one Sidious kept hidden, for war he had not yet begun. And Maul accepted this, not because he understood it, but because he had no choice. He had no friends, no comforts, no dreams, only orders, only the next task. He memorized lightsaber forms until his hands bled. He lifted stones with the Force until his mind blacked out. He moved through obstacle courses laced with real blades and no safeties. He was never told it was enough, because it never was. Every day, the bar moved higher. Every mistake drew blood. Every success earned nothing. And so Maul stopped measuring progress. He stopped hoping for approval. He simply endured, because survival was the only language his master spoke. Sometimes he would hear Sidious speak to others through comms, through hollows, through masks he wore when away from Maul's prison. He would laugh, charm, negotiate. Maul did not understand that version of him. He only knew the one who gave orders with cold eyes and no warmth. And slowly, he began to reflect it. There was no ceremony when he first built his saber hilt. Sidious tossed the pieces on the floor and walked away. The message was clear: build it or don't. If you can't, you're not ready. Maul built it in silence, twice, because the first one broke in his hand during sparring. His palm took 7 stitches. He didn't scream, because he had learned something deeper than obedience. He had learned not to expect comfort. Not from the Force, not from his master, not even from victory. The double-bladed saber was his idea, not for elegance, not for show, but because one blade didn't feel like enough. He wanted to end fights before they began. He wanted to overwhelm, not defend. He didn't want to dance. He wanted to end. And Sidious approved. Not with words, but with silence, which, from him, was the closest thing to trust. Maul did not feel pride. He felt readiness. He no longer asked what came next. He no longer cared what the galaxy thought. His heart didn't beat with hope. It beat like a countdown. Because he wasn't alive, not in the way others were. He was waiting to be released, and the galaxy would never be ready. Pain became his teacher, and it never ran out of lessons. Sidious did not explain the purpose of pain. He simply delivered it. Through combat, through hunger, through silence that lasted days. Maul learned that silence could hurt more than a blade. That waiting could be its own torture. That mercy was a word without meaning. When he failed, Sidious struck him down. When he succeeded, Sidious struck harder. Because reward was weakness. Because comfort unmade discipline. And still, Maul rose. He learned that every cut had meaning. Every scar a memory not of defeat, but of instruction. The Force itself seemed to shift with every bruise, as if recognizing that he no longer resisted its cruelty. There was no kindness in this training, only endurance, only the endless repetition of death without dying. Sidious made him fight droids, programmed to kill. No safety protocols, no limit. He was told to survive until his body failed, and when it failed, to rise again. He was given nothing. Not food, not rest, not words of praise. Only the echo of the dark side, whispering in his veins. At night, he meditated until his vision blurred. He would feel the pulse of his own heartbeat and imagine it syncing with the rhythm of the galaxy's sphere. Because that was what Sidious demanded, to feel everything and to use it. When pain came, Maul did not retreat from it. He let it in. He studied it. He learned its edges, until pain itself became a tool. And once pain lost its power, he became unstoppable. Sidious saw it happening. He did not stop it. He only added more weight. He forced Maul to fight in freezing water, then in fire. He made him balance on the edges of cliffs with his eyes blindfolded, trusting only the hum of the Force. When Maul fell, he was not rescued. He climbed back, bleeding, half-conscious. And Sidious was waiting. "You are nothing," he would say. And Maul would answer, "Yes." Because the truth was simple. He was nothing until his master shaped him into something useful. The years blended together. No birthdays. No calendar. No sense of time. Only the cycle of testing, failing, surviving. His body became a map of scars. Each one a memory of endurance. Each one proof that he existed for a reason. When he was older, Sidious began teaching him Force lightning. Not to wield it, but to resist it. He would strike Maul for hours. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. But Maul never screamed. The first time he endured without sound, Sidious simply said, "Better." It was not praise. It was permission to continue breathing. Maul realized then that obedience was survival, but mastery was earned only through suffering. He trained with blades until his hands bled through the wrappings. He memorized the movement of Jedi from ancient holocrons. He studied how they stood, how they hesitated before killing, how they spoke about compassion. Sidious called it weakness. Maul called it a target. There was a moment, brief, fragile, when Maul almost understood what compassion might feel like. He felt it for a dying creature he was ordered to kill. He hesitated. Sidious watched in silence. Maul looked at the creature again, then ended it. Afterward, he stood alone in the dark, staring at his hands, wondering why they shook. That was the last time they ever did. From then on, every wound was a lesson. Every scar was a step closer to perfection. And perfection, in Sidious's eyes, was obedience without emotion. Sidious often spoke of the Jedi, not with fear, not even with hatred, but with contempt. He called them blind shepherds, guardians who preached peace while letting the galaxy rot beneath their order. To Maul, they were more than enemies. They were the reason for his existence. He was raised on their absence the way Sidious described them as hollow. Creatures who had traded instinct for doctrine, compassion for rules. The Jedi cannot see what moves beneath them, Sidious would whisper. They are deaf to pain, blind to anger, and it will destroy them. Maul believed it, because he wanted to. He wanted his suffering to have meaning. If the Jedi were truly pure, then why did the Force choose to let him live in darkness? Why was pain the only language it spoke to him? He never asked Sidious these questions, but they lingered like the echo of a wound that never healed. Sidious fed those questions with more training, more control. He would send Maul into cities disguised as a servant, watching how he reacted to kindness, to crowds, to laughter. The boy was invisible there. He did not smile. He did not belong. Sometimes, a stranger would glance at him curious, unaware, and for a moment, Maul felt something alien. A flicker of envy. A wish to know what it felt like to be untouched by purpose. But the feeling passed. Because Sidious was always watching. "You see," he would say, "the Jedi think the galaxy is filled with light, but it is only pretending." Maul studied their images in holorecords, their calm expressions, their serene movements. He tried to imitate them once, the stillness, the control, but it felt like suffocation. He realized then that he did not hate the Jedi for what they were. He hated them for what they weren't. They could not see him. They could not feel him. Because to them, he did not exist. And that made him perfect. Sidious taught him how to hide within the Force, how to become invisible, even as power surged through him. He practiced the art of absence, to suppress his rage until it became patience, to bury his fear until it became focus. He learned to move in shadows that even the Jedi could not sense. Because Sidious was not preparing a warrior. He was preparing a ghost. At night, Maul would dream of striking them down. Their robes torn, their sabers silenced, their calm replaced with the terror they had never known. But sometimes the dream changed. He would stand before a temple of light and feel something pulling him closer, not anger, but curiosity. What would it feel like to be welcomed there? To be taught without pain? The thought alone was enough to make him hate himself. Sidious sensed it. He always did. He tightened the leash. "You are not like them," he would say. "They serve balance, you serve truth, the truth of power." And Maul nodded, because disagreement brought consequences. But deep within, a quiet fracture was forming. The more he learned about the Jedi, the more he saw the mirror they unknowingly held before him. Where they sought peace, he was forced into war. Where they sought understanding, he was denied identity. And that denial became his strength. Because what the Jedi could not see, they could not stop. He would be the storm they never sensed coming. He would be their punishment for believing the light could save them. And when that day arrived, they would finally feel everything he had been forced to become, everything the dark had made of him. The years had no shape. They bled together like wounds that never closed. Maul no longer counted them. Time meant nothing. Only readiness did. He had become faster, sharper, quieter. His movements were no longer learned, they were reflex. His rage no longer shouted, it breathed. Sidious had taught him that true power was not in display, but in restraint. The strike meant nothing unless it came after silence. And Maul had learned silence. He lived in it. The force around him no longer felt wild. It obeyed. It bent under his will like metal under fire. But inside, something else was forming, not rebellion, not emotion. An emptiness so complete that it felt like peace. Sidious saw it too. He said nothing. Because this was the moment he had waited for. The weapon was ready. Maul's mind no longer drifted to Dathomir. He no longer remembered the smell of the forests, or the face of his mother. Those memories had been ground into ash. If they returned in dreams, he struck them down there too. He no longer dreamed of freedom. He dreamed of purpose. When Sidious entered his training chamber, Maul was already kneeling. Not because he was told. Because he knew. The air between them was cold, heavy with unspoken truths. Sidious's voice broke the stillness. The time approaches. No explanation, no location. Just those words. Maul bowed his head. He didn't ask what mission awaited him. He didn't ask who his target was. Questions belong to the weak. Sidious circled him slowly. The faint hum of Maul's lightsaber crystals echoed from the workbench nearby, the double-bladed weapon now perfected. A reflection of its maker. "You feel hatred," Sidious said. "Yes, my master." "Good. Hatred is the beginning of control, but never its end." The words burned into him like the tattoos across his skin. Sidious spoke of the Jedi again, not as foes, but as destiny. "They will not see you coming," he whispered. "You will be their extinction, the proof that balance was always a lie." Maul listened, unmoving. The thought of facing them stirred something deep within him, not excitement, not fear, but hunger. He wanted to see their eyes when they realized, when they understood that mercy had no power left. But Sidious was not finished. "You are not alive," he said. "You are prepared. That is enough." Maul understood. To live was to feel. To be ready was to exist without it. That night, as Sidious left him alone in the dim chamber, Maul ignited both blades for the first time. The red light filled the room, cutting through the darkness like a heartbeat. He moved slowly, at first one strike, one turn, one breath. Then faster, until the blades became a blur of crimson motion, carving through the air like the future itself. He could almost see it now, the temple, the Jedi, the fear that would follow his name. He could almost hear Sidious's laughter beneath the roar of his saber. And when the energy faded, when the silence returned, Maul looked down at the weapon in his hands. It was not just a saber. It was the sum of everything he had endured. Every scar, every scream, every moment he had been denied the right to be human. He exhaled slowly. There was no anger left in the sound, only calm. Because anger belonged to those still uncertain of their purpose. Maul had no uncertainty left. He had become what Sidious needed. A shadow without doubt. A storm without hesitation. He was not alive. He was ready. And the galaxy, sleeping under the illusion of peace, had no idea what was coming. He moved through the galaxy like a shadow that had never been seen before. For years, Maul had been trained in secret, honed into something silent, swift, and merciless. But now, the waiting was over. The weapon had been shaped. The blade was ready. And Darth Sidious, his master, was ready to strike. The Jedi thought they understood darkness. They believed the Sith were extinct. They taught that balance had been restored, that the ancient wars were long buried. They could not sense the storm rising beneath their feet, because Sidious had built something they could not predict, a phantom. Maul's presence in the galaxy was not public, it was not political, it was not loud. He was not sent to make speeches or threats. He was sent to do one thing: move without being seen, kill without being known. The first missions were small: surveillance, tracking, elimination of silent threats. Disrupt trade routes that the Jedi quietly protected. Intercept couriers who unknowingly carried secrets across star systems. Deliver messages with no return address, burned into the wreckage of ships and silenced bodies. No names, no witnesses, no trace. Maul carried them all out without hesitation. But Sidious wasn't watching the missions. He was watching Maul. Watching how he moved when no one was around. How his hatred sat beneath the surface, boiling slowly. How he obeyed, but also wanted more. Not more power, more release. Because every strike Maul made was not just against the Jedi's order. It was against the years of silence, the years of pain, the years of being shaped instead of seen. When he moved through Coruscant in disguise, silent among the crowd, hiding in the lower levels, no one recognized what he was. No one noticed the blade standing beside them in line. No one felt the weight of the Sith reborn, waiting just one word from Sidious to ignite. That was the brilliance of the plan. The Jedi watched the Senate. They watched trade guilds. They watched noble houses and former warlords. They never looked for a child, trained in silence. They never looked for someone who did not want recognition. Maul was the answer to a question the Jedi had forgotten to ask. And soon, they would remember. When the Trade Federation blockaded Naboo, Sidious began the final test. He told Maul the Jedi would come. He told him this would not be a mission. This would be a message. Maul did not ask who they were. He did not ask how many. He only bowed his head and waited. In his ship, the Sith Infiltrator, he traveled across stars without speaking. He meditated in the dark. He repeated the names of forms he had mastered. Juwayo, Ataru, Makashi. He polished his double-bladed lightsaber by hand. When it ignited, it did not hum. It roared. And yet, even then, he remained calm. Because anger could be used, but never allowed to lead. Emotion was not fuel. It was bait. The Jedi would look for emotion. Maul would give them precision. When he stepped foot on Tatooine, it was the first time he had stood in open daylight with his face uncovered. The wind touched his skin. The sand stuck to his boots. The heat clawed at his armor. But none of it mattered. Because he could feel them. Not just the Queen, not just the entourage. The Jedi. One old, one young. He could feel their light. And it made the darkness inside him awaken. He did not speak. He did not hesitate. He mounted his speeder and rode out into the desert. Not to chase, but to begin. The desert met the horizon like a furnace. Heat shimmered across the dunes as two presences in the Force drew closer, light and shadow, each aware of the other long before their eyes met. Maul had waited for this moment his entire life. Every strike, every scar, every lesson had led him here. The Jedi were no longer ghosts from holocrons or distant stories. They were real, and they were in his way. The first encounter was brief, the sound of engines, the flash of motion, the crackle of red against blue. Qui-Gon Jinn leapt from the sands to meet the figure charging toward him, and the air split with the scream of plasma. For a heartbeat, the galaxy remembered the sound of war. Maul attacked like a storm released from centuries of silence. Each blow was measured but furious, every movement balanced between precision and rage. Qui-Gon blocked, deflecting the red arcs that carved the sand into glass. He did not know the face behind the mask, but he felt the intent. Pure hate. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. The ship rose, Qui-Gon retreated, and Maul stood alone in the desert wind. His first taste of battle had not satisfied him. It had awakened him. When Sidious called, Maul knelt again. "The Jedi know," Sidious said. "They will come to Naboo. You will finish what you began." And so, Maul waited. Not with impatience, with hunger. The hunt was no longer a lesson. It was destiny. The siege of Naboo unfolded in chaos, armies clashing, ships burning, droids marching. But Maul moved through it all like a ghost, unbothered by the noise of politics or war. He cared for none of it. He wanted only the Jedi. When the doors of Theed's generator complex opened, he stood there silent, hooded, patient. And then he dropped the cloak. Twin red blades ignited in unison. A single line of sound split the air, low, steady, terrifying. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi stepped forward. One master, one apprentice, the same reflection of what Maul and Sidious had become. The fight began with no words. Only movement. Only inevitability. Every strike was poetry written in blood and motion. Maul pressed forward, spinning, leaping, striking from angles the Jedi had never faced. His weapon was an extension of his will, one blade for each of them, relentless and perfect. They fought across platforms, through fields of energy, beneath the pulse of the reactor core. It was not merely combat. It was a test of belief. Qui-Gon fought with patience, guiding his apprentice through rhythm and control. Obi-Wan followed his master's lead, precise and loyal. But Maul was unchained. He had no patience, no faith, no restraint. Only purpose. Every clash of sabers echoed through the halls like the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. Each impact threw sparks that lit the red tattoos on Maul's face, marking him as something ancient and inevitable. He drove the Jedi back, step by step, forcing them to separate. Energy fields closed between them, trapping Obi-Wan behind a barrier of light. He pounded his saber against it, helpless, while Qui-Gon faced the Sith alone. Maul smiled, not with joy, but recognition. The strong must destroy the strong. That was the law written into him. Qui-Gon fought well. Every motion calm, every breath measured. But Maul's fury had no rhythm. It devoured patience. The final blow was quick, a twist, a strike, a gasp. Qui-Gon Jinn fell to his knees as the red blade passed through him. His saber fell silent, and Maul turned, breathing slowly, ready for the next. Because there was always a next. For a breathless moment, the duel stood still. The hum of plasma faded into the endless pulse of the reactor. Qui-Gon Jinn's body lay motionless, the blue light of his saber dimming into nothing. Across the barrier, Obi-Wan Kenobi watched. He did not blink. He could not. Maul turned slowly, breathing through the rhythm of his victory. The prophecy his master had spoken was fulfilled. The Sith had returned. He paced before the dying Jedi, blade in hand, savoring the precision of the moment. There was no joy, only completion. The energy field vanished, and Obi-Wan charged. The young Jedi struck with a fury Maul had never felt before, not from anger, but from loss. Each swing carried the weight of a student avenging his teacher. Maul welcomed it. Every strike, every scream, every sound was fuel. He deflected the attacks with ease, his movements elegant, almost graceful. He was faster, stronger, certain. But certainty is the most fragile illusion in war. He pushed Obi-Wan backward, forcing him toward the reactor shaft, cutting through the thin bridge that separated them from the abyss. One strike, another, sparks filled the air. And then, a misstep, a single moment of overconfidence. Maul's blade came down too wide. Obi-Wan seized the moment, disarmed, hanging over the pit. Maul looked down, certain of his triumph. He had waited a lifetime for this victory. He did not see the calm in Obi-Wan's eyes. The calm that came only when nothing else remained to lose. The Jedi leapt, a single movement. A flash of blue from below. And Maul felt it the impossible. The blade cut through him from waist to chest. Time froze. The look in his eyes was not fear. It was disbelief. As if the universe itself had betrayed him. For years, he had been told the Sith could not fail. That destiny was already written. That pain meant purpose. And yet, in that instant, pain was all that remained. The world turned red, then black. He fell slowly, weightlessly down into the core of Naboo. The hum of his saber faded into echo. His body split apart. But his hatred stayed whole. Because the dark side does not vanish with the flesh. It lingers. As he fell, Maul's thoughts did not reach Sidious. They turned inward to the child on Dathomir, the boy who was never allowed to be anything but a weapon. He remembered the forests, the chanting, the cold eyes of the witches who had given him away. He realized he had lived his master's life, not his own. And now that life was being taken from him. But the hatred remained. It refused to die. It clung to the air like smoke, whispering against the walls of the reactor shaft. The force swirled around it, dark and heavy. He wanted to scream, but no sound came. He wanted to reach out, but nothing answered, only silence. And in that silence, the galaxy turned its gaze elsewhere. The Republic celebrated its victory. The Jedi believed balance had returned. Sidious mourned nothing. No one searched the depths of Naboo. No one asked if the body was found, because no one imagined it could have survived. But the dark side remembers everything. It does not forgive. It does not forget. And somewhere, far below the city of light, hatred opened its eyes. The world above moved on. But beneath it, in the darkness, where machines hummed and metal decayed, something still breathed. Half a man, half a memory, but fully alive. Maul did not die. He refused to. Hatred is not a flame that fades, it clings to what remains. And for Maul, there was only one thing left to hold on to. Revenge. The fall had broken his body, his spine, his legs, his purpose. But the dark side filled the cracks. It pulled the fragments together and bound them with rage. For days, maybe weeks' time meant nothing. He drifted between life and death. He heard voices that were not there. He saw faces he had never met. He spoke to shadows that answered with laughter. He was alone, buried within the veins of the planet that had witnessed his failure. Yet the hatred did not fade. It grew. He fed on it, whispering the same words again and again. Kenobi. That name became his heartbeat. Each echo through the void reminded him of everything taken from him. His victory, his purpose, his place beside Sidious. When his body finally moved, it did not move like it once had. The lower half of him was gone, replaced by nothing but pain and instinct. He crawled through the tunnels, dragging himself with shaking arms. He hunted what he could find: metal, scrap, fire. He built himself legs. Not human legs. Not organic. A twisted cage of iron and hate that hissed with every step. His mind fractured in the process. He no longer remembered the Force as his servant. It became a storm that surrounded him, feeding him visions he could not understand. He saw Sidious's face in the dark, smiling. He saw his mother's eyes, distant and cold. He saw the Jedi temple, shining like a wound that would never close. Each image cut deeper than the last. He screamed until his voice vanished. Then he whispered until silence became company. Somewhere in the void, the Force listened. It did not comfort. It observed. Because the dark side does not pity what it creates. It only watches to see if the creation will destroy itself. Maul did not. He survived. Because the alternative meant surrender. And surrender belonged to the weak. Over time, scavengers found him. They avoided him at first, the half-machine creature muttering in the dark. But even they began to fear what they could not kill. Legends formed in the lower depths. Stories of a demon who haunted the tunnels. They said he was neither alive nor dead. That he fed on the will of the living. They were not wrong. Each day, the rage kept him breathing. Each night, it whispered the same name. Kenobi. He could not remember the reason anymore. Only the emotion. The hatred had outlived its origin. It had become identity. The galaxy believed he was gone. Sidious had already chosen another apprentice. The Jedi had closed their eyes to the shadows once more. But Maul was still there somewhere beneath their victory. The phantom they thought destroyed was rebuilding himself. Not as a Sith, not as a man, as hunger given form. In the stillness of his cave, Maul stared at the sparks of his dying fire. He no longer felt pain. He no longer felt fear. Only motion. Only purpose. Because death had tried to claim him and failed. He had been cut in half, but his will remained whole. He was no longer apprentice, no longer servant. He was the wound the galaxy had forgotten to heal. And soon, it would remember. There was no light, no stars, no sky. Only the sound of metal grinding against stone. Only the breath of something that should not still be breathing. Maul had fallen, cut in half, left to die. But death did not take him. The pain did. It held him long after his body stopped working. Long after the flames of battle had cooled. Long after his master stopped speaking his name. He drifted through darkness, through agony, through silence, until he awoke on Lotho Minor. A world of trash and fire, forgotten by the galaxy. It was not a planet. It was a graveyard. A place where the unwanted were dropped and never found. There, beneath the surface, deep in the veins of metal and waste, Maul opened his eyes, but he was no longer Maul. Not fully. Not yet. He remembered fragments. Red. Light. A face. A name. Kenobi. The name echoed inside him like a wound that couldn't close. He did not know what had happened, only that he had been betrayed. Abandoned. Forgotten. His legs were gone, replaced with crude spider-like appendages built from junk, fused to his torn body. They carried him like an insect, lurching, clicking, twitching. He moved through the tunnels without reason, not hunting, not thinking, just surviving. Time passed. He could not measure it. He could not speak. His mind unraveled like broken circuitry. Thoughts became whispers. Whispers became noise. Noise became the only thing left. The cave walls listened. They echoed every muttered word, every groan, every scream. Sometimes they screamed back. He forgot his name. He forgot the Sith. He forgot Sidious. But he did not forget pain. Pain became his only tether to reality, the only constant, the only truth, and through it all, the same word returned. Kenobi. It became his heartbeat, his prayer, his purpose. He repeated it until his voice cracked, until the insects crawled away in fear, until the stone itself seemed to recoil. The other scavengers on Lothal Minor told stories of the beast in the deep, a creature of metal and madness, with eyes like burning stars and legs that moved like knives. They whispered of a monster who spoke to the dark, and the dark answered. Maul knew none of this, because Maul, as he had once been, was no longer there. What remained was instinct, hunger, hatred. He clung to pieces of memory, not for comfort, but because forgetting them would mean disappearing completely. In the silence, he would sometimes sit still for hours, listening, trying to remember his voice. The one that spoke without rage, the one that once asked questions instead of only making threats. But the voice never came. There were no Jedi in this place. No Sith. No Master. Only the cave. Only the fire. Only the echo of his own mind breaking against the walls. He scratched marks into the stone with sharpened metal. Symbols with no language. Lines without meaning. It was not communication. It was survival. Proof that he still existed. That the Force had not fully erased him. The Force. He felt it differently now. It did not flow. It twisted, warped around him like smoke with nowhere to go. He reached for it sometimes, not to control, just to feel. But even the Force recoiled, because what Maul had become was not natural, not balanced, not whole. He was a scar, a ripple, a wrongness kept alive only by obsession. And yet, he endured, day after day, year after year, because the one thing stronger than death was the will to destroy. Maul didn't know if he would ever leave the tunnels. He didn't know if he had the strength to. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that if Kenobi still lived, he would crawl through fire, through madness, through eternity, just to face him again, even if it meant dying all over again. He no longer called himself anything, because names were for people, and he had stopped being a person a long time ago. In the tunnels of Lothal Minor, Maul had become something else. Not Sith, not machine, not even creature. He was pain held together by rust and memory. The spider legs that carried him screeched as he moved through twisted passageways of garbage and ash. They were never still. Even when he rested, they twitched like broken thoughts trying to reassemble themselves. He slept in brief moments, but sleep never brought silence. Only visions. Visions of fire, of temples, of voices that once commanded him, then left him behind. And always one name, Kenobi. Sometimes he would speak it aloud. Other times he whispered it without sound. Even when his jaw hung open and no words escaped, the hatred remained. It didn't fade. It grew. Because the galaxy had moved on. But he hadn't. The world had forgotten the Sith who fell. But Maul remembered everything. He remembered the twin blades, the rush of motion, the victory that was ripped from him in a single strike. He remembered the way Kenobi looked at him not with hatred, but with resolve. A resolve that shattered everything Maul believed about strength. And now, that memory was all he had. He hunted things in the tunnels not for food, but to feel something. To remember what movement meant. To remember that his body still responded when his mind no longer did. He didn't kill for survival. He killed because it filled the silence. The scavengers avoided him, not because he chased them, but because they felt what he was. Wrong, unnatural, empty. The Force still touched him, but it no longer flowed through him as it once did. It clung to him like oil. It recoiled as much as it obeyed. He would try to meditate as he had been taught. Sit still. Focus. Breathe. But focus was a broken mirror now, and breathing only reminded him that he still existed when he didn't want to. He screamed, sometimes. Not out of pain, but out of frustration, out of loneliness, out of rage that had nowhere else to go. The sound echoed through the cavern, twisting back into something he didn't recognize. He would stop, fall to the floor, let the legs lock beneath him like chains, and still, the rage remained. He told himself that if he could just hold on long enough, just survive one more day, someone would come. Not to help, not to save, but to see. He wanted to be seen. Not as a monster, not as a weapon, but as something still alive. Because being alive was the one thing he had left to use. He didn't know how many years had passed. He had no sun, no stars, only the burning fire of his mind. But something began to change. The darkness wasn't as quiet as before. There were tremors in the Force, faint ripples like distant footsteps. He didn't understand them, not at first. Then came the voice. It wasn't Sidious. It wasn't the whispers of his own broken mind. It was something else, familiar, like a scent from childhood. He heard it in dreams, felt it in the way his limbs shook when he woke. He tried to fight it, but even his hatred paused. Something was calling to him, not with commands, not with cruelty, but with blood. And slowly, he remembered what he was. Not just a Sith, not just a weapon, a brother. He didn't remember the name. He didn't remember the face, but he remembered the bond. And for the first time since Naboo, he felt something other than rage. Hope, not for peace, not for healing, but for revenge that could finally breathe again. He wasn't whole, he wasn't sane, but he was still waiting. And someone was finally coming. Far away, across stars and shadows, something stirred on Dathomir. The winds carried whispers through the crimson fog, and the witches listened. They heard pain echoing from a place the Force had long abandoned. It was faint, but it was familiar. Mother Talzin felt it first. The Nightsister matriarch, who had given many sons to the dark side, knew that energy anywhere. It was twisted, broken, but alive. Her child still breathed. The son she had lost to the Sith, the one taken by Sidious, had not vanished into death as she believed. His hatred had kept him alive. And now, that hatred was calling home. Talzin's eyes closed. The ichor that flowed through her veins shimmered as she reached across the galaxy, searching through time, through madness, through rot. And there, buried under metal and ruin, she found him. Her voice trembled, not with pity, but with pride. The blade still burns. Beside her stood savage Opress, her surviving son. Taller, stronger, newly remade by her magic. He had once been a night brother like Maul, but the dark side had turned him into something greater, a weapon given purpose. He felt the same echo. It struck him like lightning through the mind. Pain, rage, loneliness. He fell to one knee, clutching his chest. "What is this?" "Your brother," Talzin whispered. "He lives." Savage didn't answer at first. The word brother had lost meaning in their world. Brothers were slaves, expendable, forgotten. But this felt different. It was not a call for help. It was a call for vengeance. Talzin's expression hardened. "The galaxy has taken what is ours. You will find him. Bring him home. Our blood must rise again." Savage obeyed without hesitation. He was not driven by affection, he had none left. He was driven by instinct, by something ancient inside that recognized its mirror in the dark. He left Dathomir beneath the storm's red light, riding a ship provided by the witches. His journey spanned sectors forgotten, even by the smugglers who lived on the edge of law. Each world he touched felt colder, emptier. The closer he drew to his brother, the heavier the air became. In his dreams, he saw flashes. A man crawling through tunnels, legs of iron, eyes burning like furnaces. He heard the whisper of a single word repeated again and again. Kenobi. Savage did not know the name, but he understood the tone. It was not confusion. It was obsession. The Force guided him through the outer systems until he reached Lotho Minor, a planet of waste, a graveyard of machines and forgotten crimes. It was a world that smelled of death and memory. He descended through the fumes and metal storms, following the pulse in his chest. The air thickened with the dark side. It was not clean like Sidious's control. It was raw, uncontained, the kind born of madness. Savage walked through corridors of rust, past the corpses of scavengers torn apart by something unseen. He could hear movement faint, rhythmic, mechanical. He followed it deeper, step by step, until he reached the chamber where the air itself seemed to tremble. And there he saw him. The creature was hunched, half man, half machine. A web of metal legs carried the upper body of a Zabrak, twisted by rage and hunger. Savage froze. He could not speak. He felt the Force surge between them, not with love, but recognition. Blood called to blood. The monster turned. Its eyes glowed yellow and red. And through cracked lips came a voice long lost to the galaxy. "Brother." Savage stepped closer. The air vibrated with hatred and confusion. He saw what the dark side had done. A mind shredded, a body rebuilt from scraps, a spirit that refused to die. This was not a reunion. It was an awakening. Savage reached out, not knowing if the creature before him would attack or embrace. But Maul only stared. The fire in his eyes flickered pain, shock, then faint recognition. The galaxy had forgotten him, but the Force had not. And now, its forgotten sons were together again. Maul did not speak for hours. Even with Savage beside him, even with warmth returning to his skin, his mind remained somewhere else. Somewhere darker. He sat in silence, hunched among the debris, his mechanical legs twitching beneath him. They moved on their own now, not with precision, but instinct. Like limbs that had forgotten they were once part of something human. Savage stood nearby, watching, waiting. He didn't know what to say. He only knew what Mother Talzin had told him. His brother was alive, but not whole. Maul's eyes were unfocused, locked on shadows that only he could see. He whispered fragments, words from the past, lessons from Sidious, chants from Dathomir, and always one name: Kenobi. Savage knelt. He placed his hand on Maul's shoulder, firm, not gentle. And finally, Maul blinked. His breath caught in his throat. The silence cracked. You are not a dream." His voice was raw, thin, like it hadn't been used in years. "No," Savage said. "I'm your brother." The word struck Maul like a blow. "Brother." He repeated it not as recognition, but as question. Then again, with more certainty. "Brother." The dark side stirred. It surged through him like a pulse. Not smooth or elegant, but wild, desperate to escape, desperate to rise. He tried to stand. His legs collapsed beneath him. Sparks flew. Pain shot through his spine. But he didn't scream. He growled, because pain was a sign he still existed. Savage caught him, lifted him, held him steady, and for a moment, Maul didn't resist. But then came the shaking, the fury, the memory. "I had him," Maul spat. "I defeated the Jedi, I won." His voice broke. Not with weakness, with betrayal. Savage said nothing. He didn't understand the story, only the weight of it. Maul looked up, his face twisted not in fear, not in grief, but in something older. Hatred. "They took it all," he whispered. "The Jedi, Sidious, all of them. They used me and left me to die." His hands trembled. The Force responded. Scraps lifted into the air. Dust swirled. "I will make them pay." Savage met his gaze. He saw it now, the clarity behind the madness. Not sanity, but purpose. Maul had not survived by accident. He had endured because the dark side still had use for him. Because his vengeance was unfinished. Together, they left the depths of Lotho Minor. Savage carried him onto the ship. He laid him down gently, like one would a weapon too dangerous to touch carelessly. They returned to Dathomir, to the sisters, to Mother Talzin. She greeted Maul not with sorrow but pride, because she knew what the galaxy did not. This was not a broken man. This was a wound that had healed wrong. A fracture that made the blade sharper. Through ancient Nightsister magic, she healed what she could. Not to restore Maul to who he was, but to prepare him for what he would become. The spider legs were removed, replaced with cybernetics that moved with brutal precision. His posture straightened. His voice deepened, his eyes cleared, and when he looked in the mirror, he did not see a ghost. He saw a survivor. The Force trembled, not because Maul had returned, but because he had changed. He was no longer Apprentice, no longer weapon, no longer servant to a Sith who discarded him. He was something new. Born of hate, rebuilt by rage. He no longer served Sidious. He no longer waited for permission. His war was now his own. And it began with one name. The only name that still burned in his memory like fire across flesh. Kenobi. The galaxy had forgotten him. But it would remember. He would make sure of it. Because revenge was not a path. It was a home, and Darth Maul had finally found his way back. They left Dathomir as brothers. not by birth, by blood. Maul and Savage did not speak of family. There were no warm memories, no childhood laughter to return to. Only rage shared, sharpened, and sealed by the same fire. Their bodies bore the marks of transformation. The Nightsisters had made them stronger, taller, vaster, their skin inked with runes that whispered ancient truths. Pain was a gift. Vengeance was sacred. Survival was not enough. Conquest was the only cure. Maul's mind had not fully healed, but it didn't need to. Not for what came next. He didn't want clarity. He wanted purpose. The Jedi had wounded him. Sidious had abandoned him. But neither had destroyed him. So he would become something worse than forgotten. He would become feared. Savage followed without question, not as a servant, but as someone who saw himself in the cracks of his brother's soul. They were not allies. They were mirrors. The galaxy had called them monsters. Now, it would remember why. Their first strike was not loud. They targeted a small criminal syndicate near the Mid-Rim, a band of smugglers that had once taken slaves from Dathomir's borders. Maul killed their leader in silence. Savage burned their ships. And by morning, the survivors bowed. That was the lesson. Power answers power. From there, they moved like a storm no one had forecast. Syndicates fell. Warlords vanished. Anyone who refused to kneel disappeared. Word spread in the underworld. Whispers of horned warriors who spoke the language of the Sith, but moved like something older. They offered no mercy, only opportunity. Join us, or be forgotten. The banners came quickly. The black sun, whose reach stretched across the outer rim. The Pikes, who controlled the spice veins that kept half the galaxy numbed. The Hutt clans, fractured and self-interested, yet drawn to the scent of rising power. And at the center of it all, Maul and Savage. Two sons of a world no one respected. Now building an empire without needing permission. Maul gave it a name. Not one born of ego, but of intent. The Shadow Collective. It was not built for diplomacy. It was built to hide behind the wars the Jedi could not see. Every piece of it was designed to operate beneath the Republic's notice. Smuggling, assassination, sabotage, fear. The Republic looked the other way. So did the Jedi, because to them, the threat of the Sith was gone, and the underworld was beneath their concern. But Maul knew the truth. He knew that rot doesn't begin in temples. It begins in shadows, and his collective was growing faster than anyone could stop. The final piece was Mandalore, a world of warriors, a culture that respected violence, and a throne that had always waited for someone strong enough to take it. Maul remembered the stories from his training. How the Mandalorians had once fought the Jedi across 1,000 systems. How they built weapons to challenge the Force. How they bowed only to those who earned it in combat. He didn't need their loyalty. He needed their armor. He found a faction within them. Death Watch led by warriors who no longer believed in peace. They wanted to restore Mandalore to what it once was. Maul wanted to turn Mandalore into something it had never been. So he struck a bargain. Death Watch would help him take the throne. In return, they could wear it however they wished. The plan worked. The current Duchess Satine Kryze was overthrown. Her pacifist government collapsed. And through Death Watch, Maul installed a new ruler. One who answered only to him. The people never saw him coming. By the time they knew his name, it was too late to stop it. Darth Maul now ruled a warrior planet, a criminal empire, a growing network of fear. The Jedi still hadn't noticed, but the dark side had, and it waited, silently, because power taken without purpose never stays quiet for long. There was no Senate, no elections, no holonet broadcasts, just fear, and the men who controlled it. Maul understood something the Republic never had, that control does not begin with laws. It begins with whispers, with fear traded like currency across criminal empires. And his empire was growing. The Shadow Collective did not claim territory. It claimed influence. It moved behind the syndicates, behind the cartels, behind the mercenary groups that kept the outer rim moving while the core world slept comfortably. The Jedi called it corruption. Maul called it structure. He let each faction think it served its own purpose. The Black Sun operated as always, but only under his eye. The Pikes continued to distribute spice, but only through his channels. The Hutts pretended to hold their independence, but they bled credits into his hands. And when necessary, he reminded them. Not with meetings, not with diplomacy, but with executions. A Hutt lord who refused a demand found his palace burned to the ground. A Pike traitor was left hanging in the middle of his own spice den, lifeless, surrounded by stunned silence. It wasn't cruelty. It was consistency. Maul had learned from Sidious. But where Sidious ruled through deception, Maul ruled through clarity. He did not hide what he was. He didn't need to. Because the galaxy was full of people desperate for power. And Maul knew how to offer it just enough to bind them, never enough to free them. And beneath it all, the foundation remained, Mandalore. The world became his base. Not just its warriors, but its image. When people saw the armor of Death Watch, they thought of honor, tradition, strength. Maul corrupted it, bent it towards something colder, calculated. He installed a puppet ruler, Almec, a former minister, while he and Savage operated in the shadows. Almec made speeches. Maul made decisions. Savage, loyal, and brutal, served as enforcer. The people adapted quickly. Because peace, even when false, is easier than war. Maul knew that. He'd seen it across the stars. He visited his underworld allies without fanfare. Sometimes cloaked, sometimes unmasked, but always with presence. They feared him, but more than that, they believed in him. Because Maul offered them something the Republic never could. Freedom without oversight, power without judgment, revenge without consequence. And in exchange, they gave him everything. Ships, weapons, credits, blood. In time, the Shadow Collective was not just a criminal alliance. It was an army. And Maul was its commander. He never called himself Sith. Not anymore. That title belonged to Sidious, and Sidious had thrown him away. So he became something else. A ruler born from betrayal, a strategist molded by failure, a warlord cloaked in vengeance. But even in his rise, cracks remained. Savage watched him closely. He saw the way Maul stood in silence longer than needed. The way his eyes wandered when no one was watching. The way he clenched his fists when Kenobi's name was mentioned in whispers. Maul was building a kingdom. But his heart remained in a duel that had ended years ago. Every ally, every stronghold, every warship was just a step toward a single destination. Maul wasn't creating peace. He was preparing the field, not for diplomacy, for retribution. When the Jedi finally responded, when they came to Mandalore to investigate the rumors, the disappearances, the shift in power, they were too late. By then, Maul's plan had already moved forward. He wasn't hiding from them. He was baiting them. Because power meant nothing if it didn't bring the one thing he truly wanted. A name, Kenobi. The Shadow Collective was never just a throne. It was a message, written in blood, spoken in silence. He had returned, and the galaxy would answer. Mandalore was his now, but it didn't feel like a victory. The people bowed, the warriors obeyed, the collective expanded, but Maul did not celebrate. He stood on the balcony of Sundari's royal palace, watching the city beneath him move in silence. The air was clean, the towers unbroken, but it felt wrong. He had taken everything he was supposed to want. Power, fear, control, and yet the silence in his chest had only deepened. His throne was carved in tradition, forged through fire, held together by threat. But it was still just a seat, and he was still just the boy who had been left behind. Savage noticed it. He didn't say it aloud, but he saw the way Maul stared at the stars, the way he spoke less, the way his eyes lingered on nothing. Maul had become a ruler, but he still thought like a weapon. Every day brought reports. Syndicates demanding more credits, allies breaking agreements, enemies testing the edges of the collective's reach. Maul answered them all, decisively, cruelly, but his mind was elsewhere. He no longer sought power. He used it, like a blade waiting to cut through the memory that haunted him. Kenobi. The name pulsed in his mind more than ever now, because the throne had given him everything except peace. And without peace, there could only be obsession. He thought of Satine Kryze, the Duchess he had overthrown, the woman who believed in peace even as her world rejected it. She reminded him of something, not love, but loss. The kind of idealism he was never allowed to feel. She sat in a prison now, held beneath the palace she once ruled. Maul visited her once. She said nothing at first, only looked at him, not with hatred, but with pity. That angered him more than resistance. He told her she had been wrong, that peace had failed, that violence had restored order. She only whispered, "You're still afraid." He didn't answer, because he didn't know if she was wrong. Back in the halls above, the collective began to crack. Too many factions, too many needs, too much power resting in the hands of someone they didn't understand. The Mandalorians followed out of respect, but not loyalty. The Pikes, the Black Sun, the others. They obeyed because Maul was stronger. But even strength grows tiresome, especially when it comes from someone who never sleeps. Savage tried to help. He pushed forward, executed plans, led the outer operations. But Maul grew distant. He didn't see Savage anymore, only his own reflection. And reflections, he had learned, were dangerous. They reminded him of everything he still lacked. Trust, peace, belonging. Even victory had started to taste like ash. Maul would sit on the throne and say nothing for hours. Guards would pass, unsure if they should speak. He would nod. Or not at all. He dreamed more now. Not of conquest, but of the moment on Naboo. The hum of the saber, the rage, the fall. He wondered if Kenobi still remembered. If the Jedi ever thought of him. If Sidious still whispered his name in the dark. But the silence always answered, "Not yet, not yet." And that was what burned most. The waiting. He had built a kingdom. But it was a placeholder, a distraction. Because deep down, Maul knew, the throne of Mandalore was never the goal. It was bait. Not for the Jedi. Not for Savage. But for the past. The one thing Maul could never kill. And while the galaxy bowed, he tightened his grip. Because the real battle hadn't begun. Not until the Master returned. The galaxy was quiet again. Too quiet. Trade routes reopened. The Senate praised stability. The Jedi meditated in peace, unaware that peace was already breaking beneath them. But one man knew. Darth Sidious had felt the tremor. He had felt Maul's return the way a wound feels rain. And it angered him. Because Maul's survival meant imperfection. And Sidious did not allow imperfection. Maul's shadow had grown larger than Sidious expected. A criminal empire, a throne, a movement, and worst of all, independence. The apprentice who had been discarded had become a threat to his master's design, not because of power alone, but because of will. Sidious had taught him the rule of two, but Maul had broken it. He had become one who obeyed no rule at all. And so, the Master decided to end what he had created. On Mandalore, the storm gathered. Maul felt it before he saw it. A cold in the Force, a pressure in the air that bent the light around him. He stood from the throne and whispered, "He's coming." Savage didn't understand. Who? Maul turned, his eyes sharper than they had ever been. "My master." The words fell like stone. There was no time to prepare, no time to hide, only to face what could not be avoided. The sky darkened as Sidious's shuttle pierced through the clouds, descending like judgment. The city trembled as it landed. The guards moved to block the gates. They never had the chance to scream. Lightning tore through them. Bright, effortless, followed by the sound of laughter, colder than death. Sidious entered alone. No army, no allies. He needed none. Maul stood waiting. Saber ignited, Savage at his side. For the first time since Naboo, he looked afraid. Not of death, of memory. Sidious smiled. "My apprentice lives. I am not your apprentice." Sidious's laughter filled the chamber. A sound both human and inhuman, like the dark side itself, mocking creation. "Then you are my failure." And the room erupted in light. The duel was unlike any Maul had fought before. Sidious did not move, he flowed. Every gesture, every strike, was effortless. Maul and Savage attacked together, their strength combined, their rage unrestrained. But rage was not enough. Sidious's sabers danced through the air. Each swing a lesson Maul had forgotten to fear. The Force bent around him, bending walls, bending minds. Maul struck again and again, driven not by hope of victory, but by the refusal to kneel. Sidious disarmed Savage first, then lifted him from the ground with invisible claws. "Brother," Maul shouted. Savage gasped, his body convulsing as lightning surged through his veins. He tried to speak, but no words came. Then the storm stopped, and Savage Opress collapsed, motionless. For a moment, Maul forgot to breathe. The galaxy had taken everything from him once before. Now it had taken the only thing left that wasn't rage. He charged. Sidious smiled. Their sabers met again. Red on red, light on shadow. Maul screamed, the sound shaking the walls. He was faster than ever, stronger than ever. But Sidious was infinite. In seconds, Maul was disarmed, thrown to the ground, pressed beneath the weight of lightning that burned through his armor. Sidious knelt beside him. "You have done well, my son. But there is only one truth of the Sith. Power belongs to me." Maul could not move. He could not speak. But his eyes burned through the tears of agony. Sidious leaned closer. "Do not worry. I have other uses for you." Then the darkness swallowed him. When he awoke, chains bound him. The throne was gone. Savage was gone. Mandalore was in ruins. He had survived again. But survival no longer felt like victory. He had built kingdoms. He had commanded armies. He had challenged gods. And yet, he was back where he started. In chains. Alone. Afraid. Because for all his power, Maul had never learned how to stop hungering. He would live. He would escape. He would rise again. But he would never be satisfied. The war was not about the galaxy anymore. It was about the void inside him. The hunger that no victory could fill. And that hunger was eternal. The sky above Sundari burned. Not with sunlight, but with war. Fire rained down from ships that once promised order. Explosions echoed across the domes. Republic gunships screamed through the atmosphere, carrying soldiers dressed in justice and trained for destruction. Mandalore, the warrior world, had become a battlefield again. But this time, not for glory, for erasure. Maul stood at the edge of the throne room, silent. He did not speak. He did not blink. He only watched the capital crack beneath the weight of another master's war. It wasn't the first time his empire had collapsed. It wouldn't be the last. He had built this world with blood. United syndicates, crushed resistance, sat upon a throne of shadows. And now it was slipping through his hands. He had expected the Republic would intervene eventually. But he hadn't expected her. Ahsoka Tano. Not a Jedi. Not a soldier. Something in between. Something broken, like him. She was coming. He could feel it. Not just her presence, her pain. Sharp, familiar. The same blade the galaxy had turned inward. She had been trained by Skywalker, the knight who stood too close to darkness. The one Sidious watched with hunger. The one Maul feared for reasons he couldn't yet explain. The Force twisted with tension. It coiled in his chest. He breathed in slowly, as if inhaling the storm. "Let her come," he whispered. "Let her see what they've made of me." Below, the battle spread. Clones in white and blue surged through the city's corridors. Explosions lit the underground chambers. Death Watch splintered, some fighting for Maul, others against him. Loyalty was breaking. alliances unraveling. Even the Shadow Collective had begun to fracture. But Maul was calm, because this was the moment he had foreseen. Not in dreams, in instinct, he had tried to become more than a weapon, a ruler, a force of will. But now, in the face of fire, he was only what he had always been. Alone, the door opened. She stepped inside, not with fear, not with arrogance, but with purpose. Ahsoka Tano, face calm, eyes focused, not here for blood, but for truth. Maul tilted his head. He studied her, not as an enemy, as a reflection. "You're not a Jedi," he said. She didn't answer. "You've been betrayed, you feel it, you know what's coming, you can sense the edge of it." She stepped forward, saber in hand, but lowered. "Then tell me." Maul's voice was low, measured. "The Jedi have been deceived. The Republic is dying, and your former master, he will be its executioner." She didn't flinch, but her grip tightened. He watched her, not for reaction, for recognition. He saw the same pain he carried, the same confusion, the same hunger for answers. "We could stop it," he offered. Together. Her silence was long. "Then, you want Kenobi. I want Sidious." She frowned. "He's your master. He was. Now he wants Skywalker." The words cracked the air like thunder. Not because they were false, because they were real. Maul stepped forward, his voice growing. "Anakin Skywalker is the key to everything. He is the future of the Sith, the future of your war, of your pain." Ahsoka's breath caught. The Force trembled between them, and for a moment she almost believed him. Almost. Then her saber ignited, blue light against the flickering orange sky. "You're trying to divide us." Maul smiled. Not in mockery, in tragedy. "So be it." The blades met, red and blue, rage and reason, wounds clashing in motion. And above them, Mandalore burned. The blades sang, blue and red, crossing again and again, filling the throne room with light that danced across the broken walls. Outside, Mandalore was falling. Inside, destiny collided. Ahsoka Tano and Maul moved as if drawn together by something greater than hatred. The Force rippled between them not as enemies, but as reflections. Two fragments of a galaxy that no longer understood what they were. Maul struck first, his motions precise, measured, almost regal. Every swing was control. Every step, discipline. The Sith Lord, who had once been chaos, had become something colder. Ahsoka deflected, adapting to his rhythm. Her style was different, light, unbound by the stiffness of the Jedi Council. She moved like one who had left belief behind, and that made her dangerous. "You're strong," Maul said through gritted teeth. "But you don't know what's coming." "I've heard enough of your riddles," she replied. "You want me to join you. You want me to betray everything I was." He smiled, faintly. "You already have." The words cut deeper than his saber. Because they were true. Ahsoka had left the order that raised her. She had turned her back on its blindness, its corruption, its arrogance. But even now, part of her still sought its light. Part of her still believed in redemption. Maul saw it. He saw the same conflict that once existed in him, the same fire that Sidious had smothered under chains. He attacked again. Faster, harder. Each clash sent shockwaves through the chamber. Metal screamed, glass shattered. Above them, the energy from the reactors pulsed like a living heart. "You fight for a dying cause," Maul shouted. "Sidious is already victorious. The Republic is his puppet. The Jedi are blind. And your master." He hesitated, not out of mercy, but out of weight. "Your master will become him." The words froze her mid-strike. The Force trembled. Images flashed in her mind, brief, haunting. Anakin's face, caught between compassion and fury. His voice, echoing from years past. "I won't lose you." She struck back with renewed strength. Not to win, to silence the doubt. Their sabers locked, pressing between them, their faces inches apart. Maul's eyes burned. Ahsoka's glowed with focus. "You feel it," he whispered. "You've always felt it, that pull in your bones, the truth they never told you." Her jaw tightened. "I am nothing like you." He leaned closer. "No, you're worse." The statement shattered something within her, not anger, but sorrow. Because in that moment, Ahsoka saw it. Not the monster. The man. The child trained for slaughter. The apprentice molded to serve. The weapon discarded once its edge dulled. She understood him more than she wanted to admit. And that was why she had to stop him. Their fight moved to the rafters, high above the throne room. They balanced on narrow beams as the fires of Mandalore raged below. Every movement was instinct. Every strike was prophecy trying to right itself. Maul pushed her back, roaring through the sound of clashing steel. He wasn't fighting the Jedi now. He was fighting the fate that had never let him choose. He leapt, twisting midair, his saber striking downward with all the fury of a lifetime denied. Ahsoka dodged by inches, catching his blade, turning his strength against him. He stumbled. She caught his arm. For a second, neither moved. The city burned beneath them. "Let me help you," she said quietly. "You can't stop what's coming, but you don't have to face it alone." He looked at her, almost disbelieving. For the briefest flicker of a moment, Maul's rage faltered. Then it returned. "You'll see," he hissed. "When the Jedi fall, when the Republic burns, you'll see I was right." He pulled free, striking again, reckless this time, desperate. Ahsoka met his attack, parried, twisted, and caught him off guard. The Force surged. Maul lost balance. The saber fell from his hand. He hung over the edge, suspended in air and pride. Ahsoka reached out the same way she once reached for the truth. But Maul only screamed, "Let me die, you don't know what's coming." Her hand stayed firm. Because mercy was still who she was. And that mercy would soon be tested by the end of everything. The city was falling apart. The hum of engines, the collapse of metal, the cries of soldiers all merging into one sound. The sound of endings. Below, the Republic's forces surged through the streets. Clones fought Mandalorians. Loyalty fought loyalty. The war that began in light was finishing in fire. High above, Maul dangled from the beam, his body trembling, his pride the only thing keeping him from falling. Ahsoka held him with the Force, straining, her hand stretched toward the man who wanted nothing but to die free. "Let me go," he shouted. "You don't understand." "I don't have to," she said softly. "Just hold on." The beam cracked. The chamber shook. Mandalore itself seemed to groan under the weight of destiny. Maul's eyes darted between her face and the fire below. He saw pity there, the same look Qui-Gon Jinn had once given him, the same weakness that had ruined everything. He couldn't bear it. He tried to wrench free. Ahsoka tightened her grip. "Stop fighting me," she yelled. For a heartbeat, they locked eyes, warrior and warrior, wound and mirror. And then, the structure gave way. The floor beneath them collapsed. Steel screamed. Both fell, but Ahsoka landed first. Her sabers flew from her hands. She hit the platform below, rolling into shadow, gasping. Maul landed farther away, crashing through wreckage, sparks bursting around him. His weapon was gone. So was hers. They faced each other again, two survivors, empty-handed, standing in the ruins of what both had built. The alarms wailed above them. Clones shouted through comlinks. The Republic had won the battle, but the war was already lost. Maul staggered to his feet. The fury in his eyes was gone. What replaced it was something colder. Desperation. "Everything is ending," he said, almost to himself. "You don't know it yet, but you will. Sidious has won. The Jedi, the Senate, all of it gone." Ahsoka stood, dust falling from her armor. "You can still choose what comes next." He laughed. A short, broken sound. "There is no next, only survival, only the ones who crawl out from the ashes." His voice cracked. He wasn't mocking her anymore. He was confessing. She saw it now, the exhaustion behind the rage. The endless cycle of rebuilding and breaking, rising and falling, living only long enough to lose again. Maul had always been fighting the same enemy, the galaxy itself. He raised his hands, calling his saber back through the Force. Ahsoka's sabers leapt to her as well. Their blades lit the dark once more. The floor beneath them shook as explosions rippled through the structure. Republic cruisers fired from orbit, leveling sections of the city to flush out resistance. Sundari, once a symbol of warrior pride, was being turned into dust. They clashed again. The fight was slower now, heavier. Not from weakness, but from fatigue that reached the soul. Every strike echoed like a question neither could answer. Why fight? Why survive? Why keep breathing in a galaxy that only remembered pain? Maul's strikes lost rhythm. Ahsoka deflected, then sidestepped, locking his saber in a trap. He tried to break free, but she twisted, forcing him down. "Stop," she said. "It's over." "Nothing is over," he screamed. "The only way to stop it is to die." The Force surged around him, wild and unstable. Panels ripped from walls. Debris spun through the air. But Ahsoka didn't flinch. She moved with quiet precision, disarming him again. The red blade flickered, then died. Maul collapsed to his knees, shaking. He looked up, eyes wide. "You don't know what you've done. He's coming. He's already here." "Who?" "Sidious." Her stomach tightened. But before she could ask, the structure above them buckled. Troopers rappelled in, blasters drawn, armor scorched from the battle above. Maul's voice broke into madness. "Fools, we're all going to die. You're all going to die." The clones surrounded them, weapons raised. Ahsoka stood still. The fight was done. The war was not. As they stunned Maul and dragged him away, he screamed into the fire. "You don't know what you've done." And as the sound of engines swallowed his voice, Ahsoka looked at the city crumbling below and realized he was right. They had won nothing. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was worse than the fire. Sundari lay in ruin, its domes cracked, its towers hollow. Smoke rose from every direction, carrying the scent of melted steel and loss. The Republic had won, but victory had never felt so heavy. In the center of the landing platform, a single container stood, thick durasteel, humming with magnetic locks. Inside, Maul hung suspended in a field of energy. Motionless, awake, Ahsoka stood before him, the wind brushing against her cloak. The clones worked quietly around them, loading wounded soldiers onto transports. None of them looked at the prisoner. None of them wanted to. Maul's eyes followed her through the transparent steel. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. He had lost everything again. But he wasn't broken. Not yet. Ahsoka stepped closer. For a long moment, they only stared at each other, two survivors caught between wars that neither had asked for. "You could have told me more," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. Maul smiled faintly, the kind of smile that knew too much pain to ever look sincere. "You wouldn't have listened." She said nothing. He leaned forward, the field around him crackling. "You think you've won, but he's already turned. Your master, Skywalker. The moment you left him, you sealed his fate." Ahsoka's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she almost looked away. But she didn't. She couldn't. "You're wrong," she said. "He's strong. Stronger than you." Maul laughed, low and bitter. "Strength is what kills the strong." She wanted to argue. She wanted to believe in the boy she once followed through battle, the friend who taught her courage when the galaxy felt hopeless. But deep inside, something shifted. A whisper, a chill, a premonition too familiar to ignore. She stepped back. The clone sealed the cell, cutting off his voice. But his laughter lingered. Hours later, the skies above Mandalore cleared. The last fires dimmed. The last transports left orbit. Ahsoka sat in the quiet of the ship's hold, staring at the container that held Maul. He was still awake, still staring back. Neither spoke. Outside the viewport, hyperspace stretched before them, endless light, endless motion, endless escape. But escape was only illusion. Because even now, something was changing. Far away, in the heart of Coruscant, a new order was being born. A new empire. A new darkness. And Maul could feel it. The tremor in the Force. The shift in the air. The moment when everything he had warned her about began to unfold. He closed his eyes and smiled, not with joy, but vindication. The galaxy had finally caught up to his madness. When the engines slowed, he felt it before anyone else. The sudden pulse, the wave of betrayal. Then it came, blast of fire, echoing through the ship. Shouts, confusion, pain. Order 66. Ahsoka staggered to her feet as her comlink came alive with screams. The clones, the same men who had fought beside her, who had trusted her, were turning, executing a command they didn't understand. She could feel it in the Force. Death. Everywhere. She ran. Corridors turned to chaos. Blaster bolts hissed. She deflected them, disarming without killing. Her heart pounded with disbelief. It wasn't just the clones. It was the end of everything. Behind her, the container trembled. Maul's voice echoed from inside. You feel it, don't you? The fire, the slaughter. The Jedi are finished. Ahsoka hesitated. Every instinct screamed to leave him there. But she couldn't. She opened the cell. Maul stepped out slowly, his eyes blazing with something close to joy. At last, the galaxy remembers me. She glared. I'm not freeing you. I'm using you. Distract them. Help me stop this. He grinned. We want the same thing now, little one. They didn't. But for a moment, their paths aligned. As Maul vanished into the smoke, Ahsoka turned toward the battle she could not win. The Force felt hollow, the galaxy unrecognizable, and the boy she once called Master was gone. When the ship finally crashed, when the fires went out, when the graves were dug, she stood alone among the wreckage. And somewhere beyond the stars, Maul lived again free, but never at peace. Because freedom had never been salvation. It was just another kind of prison. The Clone Wars had ended, but not with peace. There were no victory parades, no celebrations, only silence. The Jedi were gone, the Senate consumed. The Chancellor had crowned himself Emperor, and the Republic was now an empire in name and in truth. Across the stars, stormtroopers replaced clones. Republic flags burned, and black banners rose in their place. One voice ruled the galaxy. Darth Sidious, Maul's master, his betrayer, and Maul. Maul survived. He did not scream when the galaxy shifted. He did not rise to challenge Sidious. He simply vanished. A shadow drifting from one system to the next. No longer a Sith. No longer a weapon. No longer anything that mattered. He watched as Jedi temples were razed. He listened to whispers of inquisitors hunting the last survivors. He felt the Force ripple with every death. And still, he did nothing. There was no vengeance left to take. Sidious had already won. Maul had lost everything. Savage, Mother Talzin, the Night Brothers, even Mandalore. Every place he had tried to claim, every life he had tried to shape, had crumbled in his hands. And so, he drifted. Not like a warrior, like a ghost. The Outer Rim became his graveyard. Worlds broken by war. Cities crawling with crime. Refugees hiding in tunnels, in jungles, in abandoned freighters that no longer flew. Here, he was not feared. He was not known. He was just another scarred face in a galaxy full of pain. He didn't speak of the past. He didn't seek allies. He walked through ash and ruin, and let the wind erase his footprints. Sometimes, he would ignite his saber in the dark, not to fight but to remind himself that it still existed, that he still existed. Other times, he would dream, not of the Jedi, but of Sidious. That face, that smile, the lies disguised as purpose, the promise that pain would lead to greatness. And every time he woke, he felt something colder than hatred. He felt emptiness. Sidious had filled him with purpose, then took it away. And Maul did not know who he was without it. He wasn't sure he wanted to. For years, he kept moving. Tatooine, Nar Shaddaa, Lotho Minor. He returned to places that meant nothing, just to see if they still hurt. They did. He remembered his fall, the fire on Naboo, the blade that cut through his body, the pit that swallowed him. He should have died there. He was meant to die there. But something worse happened. He lived. And survival, he learned, was not a gift. It was a sentence. A curse he carried across the stars, waiting for something to change, knowing nothing ever would. In time, his robes turned to rags. His horns dulled. His eyes dimmed. Even the force around him grew quieter. Not gone, but tired. Like it too had forgotten what he was. But still, he listened. Still, he watched. Because even if the Sith had cast him aside, even if Sidious ruled alone, Maul could feel the cracks in the new empire. Fear, greed, desperation, and beneath it all, opportunity. Not for revenge, not for justice, but for something else. A shape, a shadow, a power that did not bow to Jedi or Sith, but fed on what they left behind. He would not strike from above. He would rise from below. He would not wear armor or command armies. He would build something the Sith would never understand. Not order, not balance, chaos, controlled, profitable, unseen. The galaxy had forgotten him. Good. That meant he could become something else. Not Maul the Apprentice. Not Maul the Warlord. Not even Darth. Just a name whispered in fear. A ghost that smiled in the dark. A wound that never healed. Something new was coming. And he would be waiting for it. The galaxy had moved on. But Maul refused to disappear. He no longer sought thrones or temples. He sought control not over the Force, but over men. From the shadows of the Outer Rim, he began again. Not as a Sith, not as a warrior, but as a name whispered in fear. It started small. One smuggler, one bounty hunter, one forgotten syndicate. He offered them what the Empire never could: freedom, wealth, and vengeance. He spoke little. He promised less. But those who looked into his eyes believed. They didn't know what he was. Only that, when he entered a room, the air turned colder. And when he left, people were missing. Maul did not need armies anymore. He needed obedience. And fear was enough. He built his foundation from chaos. The Black Sunday, the Pike Syndicate, the Hutts, fragments of power stitched together through blood and secrecy. At first, they fought him. Then they served him. Because Maul understood the language of greed. He spoke it fluently. Out of the ashes of the Shadow Collective, a new symbol rose: a crimson mark. It was more than an organization. It was an infection. It spread through ports, markets, and backroom deals. Every shipment, every transaction, every whisper carried his reach farther. They called it Crimson Dawn, and Maul was its phantom. He ruled from nowhere. He trusted no one. He controlled everything. Underworld lords pledged loyalty they didn't mean. Assassins killed for faces they never saw. And smugglers carried orders sealed with nothing but a red stamp. The Empire ignored them at first. They thought Crimson Dawn was another crime syndicate. But Maul was not building wealth. He was building patience. He knew Sidious had his inquisitors, his apprentices, his new weapons. But Maul was creating something the Sith could not destroy: a shadow that served no master. Years passed. The Empire expanded. Worlds were stripped, enslaved, erased. And still, Crimson Dawn endured. Because every empire needs corruption. Every tyranny feeds on greed. And Maul had made greed his religion. He rarely spoke the old words anymore: Sith, apprentice, power. They were relics of a faith that had betrayed him. But when he looked into the mirror, he still saw the red and black tattoos. The eyes that once burned for vengeance. And beneath them, the face of a man who couldn't stop remembering. Crimson Dawn became the closest thing he had to peace. A machine that moved without emotion, without purpose. Just survival. Just control. And yet, in his moments of solitude, he felt the emptiness grow. He had built an empire that stretched across systems, but it was hollow. It had no soul. The credits, the ships, the influence, they meant nothing. Because every success reminded him of failure. Every victory echoed Sidious's laughter. Sometimes he would feel the Force stir within him again, faint and distant. He would try to reach for it. It would slip away. He didn't know if it was fading, or if he was. To the galaxy, Crimson Dawn was unstoppable. To Maul, it was a cage. He had replaced one master with millions: crime lords, mercenaries, politicians. They all obeyed him, but none respected him. He was a ghost ruling over thieves, a fallen Sith pretending to be king. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw the past. Naboo, Mandalore, Savage, Sidious. Names that once gave him purpose now gave him nothing but silence. He thought of Kenobi, too. The Jedi who ended his body but never his hunger. The one enemy who made him feel alive. But Kenobi was gone, a whisper in the desert. And without him, even hatred lost its meaning. So Maul turned inward. He trained spies, killers, soldiers who would never know his story. He shaped Crimson Dawn into a reflection of himself, efficient, loyal, empty. And in doing so, he ensured his own legend would fade. Not through death, through forgetfulness. Because that was the final victory Sidious had planned for him. Not to destroy Maul, but to make him meaningless. And in the quiet halls of his fortress, Maul began to wonder if the Force had left him behind entirely. The Empire grew stronger. The shadows grew deeper. And the ghost in the galaxy watched it all, unseen. Waiting for a purpose that would never come. The galaxy belonged to the Emperor now. Every star, every system, every life bowed to his shadow. And though Maul had built an empire of his own, he still felt that shadow stretching across the stars, watching him, mocking him. No matter how far he hid, Sidious was always there. In the whispers of his agents, in the fear of his enemies, in the silence that followed every victory. The more Maul tried to forget his master, the more his master became the shape of everything around him. He had learned every lesson Sidious taught. Patience, deception, control. He used those lessons to build Crimson Dawn, to command power in secret, to become invisible and untouchable. And yet, when he stood alone in his chambers, he realized he had become the very thing Sidious wanted him to be: a reflection, a shadow of a greater evil. Sometimes he would close his eyes and still hear the Emperor's voice. Cold, precise, promising everything, taking everything. It haunted him more than the sound of his own heart. Maul had sworn to destroy the Sith who created him. But in his pursuit, he had only become one again. He ruled through fear. He killed without hesitation. He trusted no one. He demanded loyalty from those he would gladly sacrifice. He had become the echo of the very monster he hated. And that realization tore him apart. When his underlords gathered to speak of business shipments, assassinations, trade routes, he said little. He listened. He watched. He wondered which of them would betray him first. He wasn't angry about it. He expected it. Because that's what Sidious had taught. That betrayal was inevitable. That loyalty was an illusion. Maul despised the lesson. But he could never unlearn it. He wandered his fortress at night, unable to rest. The halls were filled with trophies, artifacts from worlds he had conquered, weapons from enemies long dead. He stared at them as if they might speak, as if they might tell him why he still lived when everything else he touched had died. In the darkness, he would hear whispers not from the Force, but from memory. Savage's final breath. Mother Talzin's scream. Kenobi's voice, steady and calm, even as he struck the final blow. They circled him like ghosts, not to punish him, to remind him that he had once been human. He could not bear it. And so he built more, expanded farther, took more territory, more power, more blood. Each victory felt smaller than the last. He sent agents to infiltrate Imperial ranks. He sabotaged supply lines. He bled the Empire quietly, always staying unseen. For a while, he believed he was winning. Then came the dreams. In them, he saw the Emperor's throne. Empty, silent, but behind it, he could feel Sidious breathing, laughing. Maul would wake with his claws digging into his palms. He would feel the old rage again, the same fire that once made him unstoppable. And for a moment, he almost missed it. But it was hollow now. The anger didn't burn, it echoed, a reminder of the man he used to be. He wondered if this was what Sidious had always planned, to let him live, to let him suffer, to let him become the proof that the dark side devours even its most loyal servants. If so, Sidious had won twice, because Maul no longer feared death. He feared life. Every breath felt like a punishment. Every heartbeat a reminder that he was still trapped in the cycle his master had created. He could command thousands, but he couldn't command peace. He could destroy fleets, but not the voice inside his mind. Sometimes he thought of confronting Sidious one last time, of drawing the blade, of ending it all. But he knew how it would end, the same way it always did, with him on his knees. So he waited. He told himself he was planning, but deep down, he knew the truth. He was just afraid of the quiet that would come after vengeance. He had become addicted to pain, his own, and the galaxy's. Without it, he would vanish completely. And in that thought, he heard Sidious whisper once more. Not in hatred, in triumph. "You are mine, always." Maul said nothing. He didn't need to. Because deep down, in the hollow chamber of his heart, he knew it was true. He was no longer the apprentice, no longer the Sith, no longer the enemy. He was the echo of a master's voice, a ghost trapped in his own reflection. The galaxy no longer spoke his name. And for the first time, Maul began to understand what silence truly was. Crimson Dawn thrived without him. The syndicates ran themselves now, each leader too fearful to betray, too greedy to stop. They thought Maul still watched from the shadows. But the truth was far sadder. He had stopped watching long ago. In the dark corners of Dathomir's memory, the Nightsisters were gone. On Mandalore, his banners were dust. Every place he had ruled had erased his mark. The galaxy had not killed him. it had forgotten him. He hid on small worlds, dry, nameless places where no starships came. He spoke to no one. He hunted for food. He dreamed of the past. And sometimes, when the wind carried the right sound, he almost thought he heard the hum of a lightsaber again. Red and fierce, echoing through time. But when he opened his eyes, there was only the empty desert and the endless quiet. He had spent his life reaching for power, yet power had only pulled him farther from peace. It had taken everything: his family, his faith, his purpose. Now there was nothing left to reach for. Even the Force, once so loud within him, had grown faint. It spoke in whispers he could barely hear. It did not command him anymore. It pitied him. He sometimes wondered if the Force itself regretted creating him. If he had been an accident, a weapon born from hate that refused to die. The thought didn't anger him. It almost comforted him. Because if he was never meant to exist, then perhaps his suffering meant nothing. And meaning, he had learned, was the cruelest lie of all. At night, he would sit beside the remnants of a fire, staring into the embers until they faded. Each spark reminded him of faces long gone: Savage, Talzin, even Kenobi. Enemies, family. They blurred together now. He no longer hated them. Hatred required energy. He had none left. What he felt instead was something colder. Acceptance. He had fought every battle the galaxy would allow. He had defied death more times than he deserved. He had built empires from ashes and watched them burn again. Perhaps this was how the Force balanced itself, not through victory, but exhaustion. Not through redemption, but decay. He thought of Sidious sometimes, not with rage, but with recognition. The Emperor had understood something Maul never had. That power does not fill the void. It only deepens it. And now, Maul was living proof. He imagined Sidious on his throne, surrounded by legions, unchallenged, immortal in fear. He wondered if the old monster ever felt alone. If his laughter ever sounded hollow in the dark. Maybe that was their final bond, master and apprentice, both consumed by the same emptiness. Days passed. Weeks. He lost count. Time no longer mattered. Sometimes he would feel presences moving through the stars, small, flickering lights. Jedi remnants. Smugglers. Rebels. He ignored them all. The galaxy was changing again, preparing for another war. But he had no part in it. He was tired of fighting battles that always ended the same way. Still, one name kept him tethered to existence. Kenobi. He didn't know why. Perhaps because that name was the only thing left that still carried weight. The only memory that made him feel alive. And so, he began to move again. Not out of hope, out of instinct. He would find the Jedi one last time. Not to win, not to kill, but to end the circle neither of them could escape. The stars above him shimmered as he left the forgotten world behind. He didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. In his heart, he felt the faint pull of destiny, not as fire, but as gravity. A slow descent toward the final quiet. He knew this would be his last journey. He welcomed it. Because at last, Maul understood what the dark side had never taught him. That power could not save him. That revenge could not free him. That loneliness was not his punishment, it was his nature. And when the stars around him faded to black, he smiled. Not in anger, not in fear, but in release. The ghost in the galaxy had finally found peace in being forgotten. Malachor was older than memory. Its surface, scorched and broken, bore the wounds of an ancient war no one lived to remember. A superweapon buried beneath the planet's crust had turned Jedi and Sith alike into stone, their final screams frozen in the very ash they choked on. And Maul stood among them. He walked slowly, his feet tracing the shattered paths of a temple that once reached into the sky. Now it was only ruins. A broken monument to hatred and hope. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, as if the planet had given up on waiting to be remembered. But Maul hadn't come for memory. He came for meaning. Years had passed since Mandalore, since Sidious had taken everything, since Dooku and Grievous and the Jedi had torn through his dreams, leaving only ashes behind. Even his brother was gone. Savage. That name still echoed in Maul's chest like a wound that would never close. He hadn't spoken it aloud in cycles. Not because he forgot, but because remembering hurt more than silence. He had been many things in his life: Sith, warlord, shadow. But now, he was only a ghost. Crimson Dawn still moved in his name. Its agents whispered fear into the corners of the galaxy. But Maul felt none of it. Power no longer warmed him. It just reminded him how cold he had become. Malachor called to him. Not with words, but with something deeper, something only broken things could hear. The dark side lived here, not in fury, but in regret. The kind Maul carried like a second spine. He descended into the temple, where stone bodies lined the halls like statues. Jedi and Sith locked in their final duel, never moving again. It wasn't a battlefield. It was a warning. The weapon that had ended the war still sat at the heart of the temple, dormant but not dead. Maul didn't fear it. He understood it. It destroyed everything in its path, light and dark, just like him. The Force shifted. Maul paused. Another presence. Faint, curious, young. He turned, not with alarm, but interest. This was not a threat. It was possibility. Ezra Bridger. The boy's name hadn't yet formed on Maul's tongue. But the moment he saw him, something stirred. Not recognition. Reflection. This boy, reckless, determined, wounded, reminded Maul of someone. Not Sidious. Not his mother. Not even Savage. He reminded him of himself. Before the markings, before the blade, before the hate, there was still light in the boy, flickering and unsure. Maul didn't despise it. He envied it. He didn't show himself at first. He watched. Ezra moved carefully through the ruins, unaware of the temple's hunger. Maul followed from a distance, his breath slow, his gaze heavy. He could have struck, but he didn't. He waited, and when the moment came, he didn't attack. He spoke. Don't be afraid. It wasn't a command. It was a memory. Words he wished someone had said to him long ago. Ezra flinched, but he didn't run. That was enough. Maul stepped from the shadows, leaning on a crude staff. His horns dulled by age, his robes frayed by exile. He looked like a beggar, not a Sith, but in his eyes burned a fire that hadn't dimmed. I was once like you, he said quietly. Lost, searching. Ezra listened, and Maul realized something strange. He wasn't lying. He meant every word. Because for the first time in years, Maul saw a future not for the galaxy, but for himself. He could teach the boy, shape him, not into a Sith, not into a weapon, but into something more, a purpose. Because if the boy became his apprentice, then Maul would matter again. And if he mattered, he wouldn't be alone. The temple trembled faintly. Dust fell from the ceiling like old breath. Malachor watched. It had seen masters and students before. It had seen betrayal, ambition, and failure. Now it would see something else. A broken man, a hopeful boy, and the quiet beginning of something neither fully understood. Maul smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Come," he said. "There is much to learn." And in the silence, destiny shifted not with thunder, but with a whisper. The temple was quiet again. Only the faint hum of the dark side moved through the air. It didn't roar like before. It whispered. Ezra followed close behind, his eyes wide with both wonder and doubt. He was young, not yet broken, not yet hardened, and that made him dangerous. Maul led him deeper, his voice low and measured. He spoke not as a Sith, but as a teacher. Each word crafted to sound like truth. "The Jedi hid knowledge here," Maul said. "Knowledge they feared, power they denied." Ezra frowned. "Then why would they leave it?" "Because they were blind," Maul replied. "As all who believe in order are. They cling to peace because they fear strength." He watched the boy carefully. Ezra didn't answer right away. He was listening. That was good. Maul had learned long ago that obedience was less useful than curiosity. Curiosity led to attachment, and attachment led to control. Still, something about the boy unsettled him. He wasn't like Savage. He wasn't a weapon waiting to be shaped. He was light. Not pure, not naive, but still believing that good could win. Maul couldn't decide if that was weakness or strength. They passed rows of petrified warriors, Jedi and Sith locked together, mid-strike, mid-scream. Ezra reached out, hesitated. What happened to them? "They sought victory," Maul said softly. "And in their hunger, they found extinction." He could have said we, but he didn't. He didn't want to remember that he was one of them. The temple's corridors opened into a vast chamber, carved by time and violence. A single crystal hung suspended in the center, pulsing faintly with ancient energy. It bathed them in green light. Ezra stared in awe. "What is it?" Maul stepped closer. "Knowledge, secrets, the key to everything." He could feel the boy's excitement, the way the Force rippled around him. So much potential, so much fear. He had once been the same, eager to please, desperate to belong. Sidious had seen that in him, and used it. Now he was doing the same. But it didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like survival. Because for the first time in years, someone was listening to him without fear. When Ezra looked at him, Maul didn't see a child. He saw a mirror, the reflection of who he might have been if someone had saved him before the darkness did. "Why do you want this power?" Maul asked quietly. Ezra hesitated. "To protect my friends." Maul smiled faintly. "Then you are already stronger than the Jedi. They protect ideals, not people." Ezra's brow furrowed. He didn't fully believe it, but he wanted to. That was enough. Maul turned away, hiding the flicker of emotion in his eyes. He hadn't felt this since Savage. That strange ache between control and care. The feeling of being needed. He told himself it was strategy, that the boy was a tool, but deep down he knew better. He was tired of being alone. When they reached the inner gate, Maul knelt before the old runes, tracing them with his hand. The stone pulsed faintly under his touch. Ezra watched. "Can you read it?" "Not yet," Maul said. "But together, perhaps we can." He guided Ezra's hands to the symbols. The energy flared. The temple responded. Maul felt it surge through him, power, old and familiar. It was intoxicating, but it wasn't his. It belonged to both of them. Ezra looked up, startled. What was that? Maul smiled. The beginning. He could already feel the bond forming, faint, invisible, dangerous. Through it, he sensed the boy's fear, his curiosity, his anger. All the raw edges of someone the galaxy hadn't yet broken. Maul wanted to protect that. He also wanted to use it. That contradiction didn't confuse him. It defined him. When they rested, Ezra asked questions. About the Jedi, about the Sith, about the war. Maul answered truthfully, or at least, he believed he did. Because after so many years of lies, even truth felt like manipulation. The dark side is not evil, he said. It is freedom. It is choice. Ezra looked uncertain. Then why does it feel wrong? Maul's eyes softened. Because they taught you to fear your own strength. The boy said nothing. But Maul could feel the shift, a spark of doubt forming in his mind. He told himself it was victory. Yet when Ezra finally fell asleep beside the cold firelight, Maul didn't rest. He sat awake, staring into the dark. For the first time, he wondered if this was what Sidious had felt, that strange pride, that cruel affection. He hated the thought. He hated himself for understanding it. But still, when the morning light touched the ruins, Maul felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The air grew heavy, thick with the residue of old hatred. Every step echoed with ghosts. The walls of the temple pulsed faintly with energy, alive in a way that felt wrong. It wasn't the living force. It was the scar left behind after life had been torn away. Maul knew it well. He had felt that kind of pain before, the kind that carves itself into stone. Ezra walked beside him, clutching his lightsaber hilt but not igniting it. He didn't need light. The temple provided its own faint, green and red flashes from cracks that seemed to bleed. At the heart of the ruins stood a massive obelisk. Ancient Sith script ran along its surface, glowing faintly as if it remembered the ones who built it. Ezra stopped, looking up. What is this place? Maul's voice was barely a whisper. A grave, and a lesson. He placed his hand on the stone. It trembled, reacting to his touch. Power gathered, slow, patient, cold. Together, he said, motioning for Ezra to follow. The boy hesitated, then lifted his hand. The moment his skin met the stone, the world changed. A surge of energy threw them both backward, and then everything fell away. The temple vanished. The floor, the air, the sound, all gone. Ezra gasped. They stood in a void. Not black, but endless. A space between reality and memory. Figures began to appear, faint, translucent echoes of battles long past. Jedi clashing with Sith. Masters falling to apprentices. The rise and fall of empires repeated over and over. Maul stared at them, unblinking. He had seen this before, not with his eyes, but in dreams. The cycle, the wound that never healed. Ezra turned to him, frightened. "What is this?" "This," Maul said softly, "is truth." He walked among the phantoms, his voice distant. "This is what the Force creates when it grows tired of balance. It builds gods, then breaks them. It births heroes, then buries them." The visions shifted. Maul saw Sidious towering in the dark, his laughter slicing through silence. He saw himself kneeling before him, younger, angrier, certain. The memory cut deeper than any blade. He tried to look away, but the Force dragged him closer. He heard Sidious's voice. "You are nothing without me." And beneath it, another voice, his own. "I am your apprentice." He flinched, the words echoing like chains. Even here, after all this time, his soul still knelt before that throne. Ezra reached for him. "Maul, stop. You don't have to listen." Maul's head snapped toward him, eyes burning yellow. "I can't stop, don't you understand? He never leaves." The void cracked. Flashes of light, Kenobi on Naboo, Talzin on Dathomir, Savage dying in his arms. Each memory pulling him apart. He fell to his knees. The dark side swirled around him, feeding, whispering, promising peace that would never come. Ezra stepped closer. He looked at Maul not as a monster, but as a man. And for the first time, he saw fear in those eyes. "Why do you keep chasing this?" he asked quietly. Maul lifted his head. "Because it's all I have left." The visions changed again. Now Maul saw Ezra older, colder, a reflection of himself. A boy who would grow into another ghost. "No," he whispered. "Not him. Not again." He tried to push the image away, but the Force refused. It wanted him to see. It wanted him to understand that the cycle was not Sidious's creation. It was his own. He reached out not to control, but to connect. The Force trembled. For a brief moment, the darkness eased. Ezra steadied him, their hands clasped. The temple's power surged again, not in rage this time, but in recognition. The visions faded. The floor returned beneath them. The obelisk dimmed. They were back. Ezra collapsed, gasping. Maul stood still, trembling, his breath shallow. The lesson was clear. He was not the master. He never had been. He was the wound. The scar the Force refused to close. And the boy beside him was the proof that healing was still possible. Maul turned away, hiding the tears that refused to fall. He had come to Malachor seeking power. He found something worse. Clarity. The temple was collapsing. The ground shook, ancient pillars splitting under the weight of power no one was meant to touch. Dust fell like rain. Lightning cracked through the chamber, striking stone that hadn't moved in 1,000 years. Ezra stumbled as the floor split apart. Maul grabbed his arm. "Run." They sprinted through the smoke and falling debris, each breath filled with dust and echoes of the dead. The temple wasn't dying, it was awakening, consuming itself from within. They reached the bridge leading to the surface. The air shimmered, thick with red energy. Every step was a fight. Ezra glanced back. "What's happening?" "The dark side is feeding," Maul said. "Power always demands a price." He could feel the temple's hunger clawing at his mind, pulling at his thoughts, his fears. It wanted him to stay. It wanted him to fall again. And for a moment, he almost let it. But the boy's hand tightened around his. It anchored him, the way Savage once had. the way no one else ever had. They broke free onto the surface as the ground below erupted in light. The temple roared like a living beast, spires collapsing into the dust. They stood together, watching history bury itself again. Ezra turned to him. "We did it." Maul didn't answer. He stared at the destruction, his expression unreadable. Something inside him knew the truth: the temple wasn't destroyed. It was sealed, waiting. Like him, the silence stretched between them. Maul finally spoke. "You were strong down there, stronger than I expected." Ezra smiled faintly. "Thanks, I had help." The compliment hit harder than a lightsaber. Maul looked away. He wasn't used to kindness. Not from anyone. He wanted to tell the boy what that meant, that for the first time in decades, he had felt something other than rage. But the words refused to form. Instead, he said, "You could be powerful, you know, more than your masters allow you to be." Ezra's eyes narrowed. He'd heard that tone before from Sith, from leaders, from every manipulator who promised strength. He shook his head. "I don't want power. I want peace." Peace. The word struck Maul like a blade. He had chased it his entire life without ever finding it. Hearing it from this boy, this reflection of what he once was, tore something inside him open. He tried to mask it with anger. "You sound like a Jedi." Ezra's reply was calm. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." The words hit harder than any insult. Maul felt heat rising in his chest. He wanted to shout, to argue, to remind him that the Jedi had failed. That they had betrayed him, betrayed the galaxy. That their peace had built the Empire. But when he looked at Ezra, he couldn't speak. Because he saw truth in the boy's eyes, truth that scared him. This was what he could have been. What he had thrown away. Maul turned, pacing. He could feel destiny closing in again, the same cage that always found him. He couldn't let it end like this. He couldn't be the failure again. He ignited his lightsaber. The red blade screamed to life. Ezra stepped back. "Maul, stop. You don't understand," Maul shouted. "This is how it must be. There is no peace, only power." He attacked. But it wasn't anger driving him now. It was fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of losing the last person who saw him as more than a monster. Ezra parried, desperate, defending rather than striking back. Their sabers clashed in flashes of light across the ruined plain. The Force trembled, unsure which of them it favored. Maul pressed harder. "Join me. Together we can destroy them, Sidious, the Empire, all of it." Ezra met his gaze, steady and sad. "I won't become you." The words stopped him cold. The air fell silent. The temple's glow faded into shadow. For the first time in a lifetime of battles, Maul dropped his blade. He stared at the boy, breathing hard, trembling, broken in a way no weapon could fix. Ezra lowered his saber, but didn't move closer. He saw pity in the boy's eyes. It felt like mercy. It felt like death. Maul turned away. "You'll see," he whispered. "The galaxy will break you too." Ezra said nothing. When Maul finally looked back, the boy was gone. Only the wind remained, carrying dust across the ruined stone. He fell to his knees, the Force silent around him. The Apprentice had refused. The legacy had ended. And Maul, for all his power, for all his pain, had never been a master. Only a lesson. The galaxy had shifted. Empires had fallen, and shadows had grown long. But Maul remained not as a warrior, not as a Sith. He drifted like something forgotten, clinging to the edge of memory. No longer hunted, no longer feared, but not yet at rest. He moved through the outer rim like a ghost, his name whispered only in the corners of cantinas or passed among spice runners like an old myth. Crimson Dawn had fractured, the crime syndicates scattered, the wars he tried to ignite had burned out. And still, he wandered. Tatooine was a place he once considered beneath him a barren dust bowl that bred filth and desperation. Now, it pulled at him. Not with ambition, but with instinct. The Force whispered something there. It was faint, but it was familiar. It had always been there, buried under time, heat, and silence. He had chased many ghosts in his life. This was the last. He landed far from the cities. No greeting, no allies, no purpose but the pull. Even the sun seemed to resist him, burning down on his broken frame as he walked without direction. But he felt it growing closer. Each night, he camped in silence. Each morning, he walked again. There were no voices anymore. No commands from Sidious. No war chants of Mandalorians. No screeches from the witches of Dathomir. Even his brother's voice, once loud in his mind, had long since faded. What was left was thinner than rage, more fragile than hate. A string that held him to something unfinished. He could feel him. Kenobi. Not with certainty, not with power, but like a breath held too long. He didn't know what he would do if he found him. Maul had imagined the moment for years. Dozens of ways to strike, to make the Jedi suffer, to watch the light vanish from those calm eyes. But now, there was no fire left. Only the cold. He remembered Naboo. The first time their blades met. How easily his hate had boiled then. How sure he was of victory. He remembered falling. Broken. Humiliated. He remembered Mustafar. When his master replaced him. He remembered Malachor. When the boy refused to follow. He remembered everything except peace. Tatooine had none of the majesty of the worlds he once claimed. No palaces, no armies, no throne to sit upon. But it had him. The one who had stolen everything without trying. The one who had never been broken. The one who had looked him in the eye and let him fall. Obi-Wan Kenobi. He could sense him now, not just as a presence, but as a shape in the Force. Still, quiet, watching. The old Jedi was near. Maul did not run. He did not sneak. He walked. He let the night settle. He let the quiet come. He let the past breathe, because he knew this place. This kind of silence. It was the same that filled his chest after his mother died. The same that echoed in the walls of his prison on Stygian Prime. The same that followed him through every failed plan, every lost battle, every abandoned hope. He was alone, but not for long. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like an ending. Like the last page of a book he never chose to read. The desert called him forward. And this time, he did not resist. He saw the fire first. A small glow in the distance, barely flickering against the endless sands. It wasn't the light that drew him. It was the stillness behind it. The kind only Jedi could wear like a second skin. He approached without fear. There was nothing left to fear. If Kenobi struck him down before a word could be spoken, so be it. But the Jedi did not move. He sat by the fire, calm and quiet, as if he had known Maul was coming. As if he had waited. For a long moment, Maul said nothing. He studied the man he had once sworn to kill. He was older. His robes were worn, his beard thicker. But his eyes were the same. Calm, clear, tired. He was no longer the bright knight of the Clone Wars. No longer the general who had cut through armies. No longer the man who had struck Maul down in his youth. He was just a man now, living in exile, guarding something he would not speak of. Maul stepped forward. "It ends here," he said. Kenobi did not argue. There was no hate in his eyes. Only understanding, pity perhaps, but not mockery. Maul had seen those eyes before in Jedi temples, in Republic halls, in the faces of those who believed in peace. But from Kenobi, it felt different. It felt real. They circled one another slowly. No words, no boasts, no threats. The fire crackled between them, casting shadows across their faces like the ghosts of every life they had touched. Maul's hands trembled not with fear, but with memory. He remembered how close he had come, how many times he thought he had won, and how each time fate had pulled him backward. Kenobi had never hunted him, never tried to destroy him. He only fought when he had to, and that made the wound deeper. Because even now, even here, Maul wasn't sure Kenobi saw him as an enemy. Just a mistake the galaxy never corrected. Their lightsabers hissed to life. Red and blue, anger and calm. Maul struck first. Fast, sharp, focused. He tried to mirror the move that had ended Qui-Gon Jinn. The same feint, the same posture. He had replayed that moment so many times. But Kenobi knew. He saw through it. And in one clean motion, it was over. Maul fell to the sand, his weapon slipping from his grasp. His breath caught in his throat. He had dreamed of this ending. But not like this. Kenobi caught him gently, held him as he lay dying. The desert wind blew softly around them, like the galaxy itself had paused. Maul's eyes searched the stars, not for escape, but for meaning. He had chased vengeance across systems, built armies, betrayed allies, burned worlds, and none of it had brought him peace. But now, at the end, he was no longer screaming, no longer fighting, only breathing. He looked into Kenobi's eyes and asked a question he had never dared voice. Is he the chosen one? Kenobi's answer was quiet. He is. Maul closed his eyes, not in peace, not in joy, but in something like acceptance. He had not been the Sith to change the galaxy. He had not been the weapon to destroy the Jedi. He had been a shadow, a broken echo of someone else's war. And now, at last, the war had passed him by. He died not with a scream, but a whisper. He found the fire by chance. It glowed dim and steady under the wide sky, a small island of warmth in the endless sand. Obi-Wan sat beside it as if he had been waiting. The years had carved lines into his face, but his eyes were the same calm, steady, tired. Maul did not speak at first. He watched the man who had ended him long ago and wondered how such stillness could hold so much light. They ignited their sabers without fanfare. The sound cut the quiet and made the night feel smaller. Maul struck with everything he had learned from pain. His movements were short and hard, full of the memory of old victories and old losses. Obi-Wan answered with measured defense. He did not rush. He moved as a man who had learned to carry loss with the slow patience of someone who had seen too much. Their blades met and sang, sparks flared. The fight was brief and bright, a single storm instead of a long war. Maul tried the feint he had used before. He pushed, hoping that this time the world would bend to his rage. For a moment, he thought it might. But Obi-Wan's hand was steady. The strike came clean and final. Maul fell apart, not with a shout, but with the sudden weight of all his years. Obi-Wan did not stand over him. He knelt and lifted Maul with gentle hands. He did not look for triumph. He only held what was left of a life. Maul's breath was shallow. He turned his face to the Jedi and saw pity there, not triumph. It struck him deeper than any wound. "Did you come to kill me?" he asked, voice rough. Obi-Wan's answer was quiet. "I came to end this." Maul let out a tired laugh. It sounded like broken glass. "We have all been ending things for a long time." The night leaned in. The two of them were small against the desert, but inside that smallness, the story of their lives felt enormous and very old. Maul's hand closed on the sand. He let it fall through his fingers and watched the grains slip away like moments. "I wanted a life," he said. "Not this. Not hate." Obi-Wan tightened his hold. He had no words that would change what had been done. He only had care. The kind that comes from witnessing too much sorrow. The first light touched the dunes. Two suns rose slowly, indifferent. Maul looked at them as if seeing color for the last time. His face was softer beneath the dawn. The red in his skin seemed to fade into warmth. "Is he the one?" Maul asked, and his voice was small. Obi-Wan's eyes were steady. "He brought balance," he said. Maul breathed out, a sound that was peace. "Then the war had a purpose. Not for me." Obi-Wan held him until the breath left. He did not speak a prayer. He did not speak at all. When Maul's eyes closed, there was no scream and no cheer. The desert took the quiet and kept it. Obi-Wan stayed a long time, hands on shoulders, feeling the end of a life that had known only anger. The twin suns rose higher. Light washed over the sand and the man who had been a shadow until his last moments. The galaxy would tell many stories. Some would be true, many would be wrong. But in that small, silent hour, a dying man was held, not hated. Maul died as a man, not a weapon. He had never been given peace, but in the end, he found a small mercy. The suns climbed, the wind moved the sand. The world went on still. He did not know how long he had held the body. The desert wind came and went, brushing over them like memory. In death, Maul had fallen quiet. No rage remained, no fire. Only the stillness of a man who had nothing left to fight for. Obi-Wan did not speak. He simply listened to the stars, the wind, the ache of everything that had come before. He felt the force shift, not with triumph, but with rest, as if some long scream had finally ended. He remembered the first time he saw Maul, that blur of red and black on Naboo, the wild storm of motion, the fury that could not be reasoned with. He remembered Qui-Gon falling. He remembered the hollow silence that followed. Years had passed, wars had come and gone. And now, that same fury lay broken in his arms. Not defeated, just finished. Obi-Wan looked down. Maul's face had softened in death. It no longer looked like a mask carved for war. It looked like a boy raised by hate, returned to silence. He set the body gently on the ground. There was no funeral, no flame, only sand to carry the memory away. Tatooine stretched around him, a wasteland, a hiding place, a tomb for old ghosts. He turned toward the Lars homestead in the distance. Luke Skywalker was still just a boy, wide-eyed, full of dreams, untouched by the truths buried in the galaxy's bones. And Obi-Wan knew the day would come when he too would face this pain. But not yet. The child still had time. Time Maul had never been given. The wind picked up, tracing soft patterns across the sand. It touched the hem of Obi-Wan's robe, and for a moment it felt like a farewell. He did not look back, because Maul had died facing forward, not toward revenge, but toward the truth. That he had been a weapon crafted by others. That he had lived without choice. And that in his final breath, he had asked about the boy, not to destroy him, but to understand him. There was something human in that, something almost free. Obi-Wan walked away slowly. He left no markers, no grave, only a story. One the desert would keep. Night returned. The stars opened overhead, cold and silent. The twin suns had passed, but their light still echoed in the sky, faint but real. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Sith still ruled. Crimson dawn still bled shadows into broken places. The Empire was growing, the dark side rising. But for this 1 hour, nothing moved. Peace had come. Not for the galaxy, not for the Jedi, but for one man, one broken soul who had never known kindness. Maul had been born into a trap, shaped by anger, used, twisted, cast aside. He had searched for meaning in blood, in vengeance, in power, and every time the galaxy had answered him with silence. But here, in the arms of an old enemy, he was finally heard. And in that silence, in that soft, final breath, he became something more than a Sith, more than a weapon, more than the hate that had raised him. He became a man, and for the first time, he was not alone. The wind moved on, the stars blinked, the sand settled, and the story of Darth Maul, the ghost, the shadow, the rage of a forgotten war came to an end. Not with fire, not with screams, but with peace.